The moment Elena Harrington's Louboutins clicked onto the sawdust-covered floor of Daniel Reed's workshop, he knew his carefully constructed world was about to collapse. She didn't come with a contract. She came with desperation in her eyes and an impossible demand. Pretend to be my husband for one night, or I lose everything. Daniel's hands, scarred from years of working steel and raising a child alone, tightened around the wrench he was holding. He should have said no, should have walked away. But when the most powerful woman in Chicago looks at you like you're her last option, saying no becomes complicated. If you want to see how a single father's quiet life collides with corporate warfare, stay until the end. Hit that like button and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels. The workshop smelled like machine oil and fresh-cut pine, a combination Daniel Reed had come to associate with survival. It was 6:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, which meant he had exactly 43 minutes before he needed to pick up 7-year-old Sophie from after-school care. The laser cutter hummed its mechanical song as it traced patterns into a sheet of aluminum, and Daniel watched the sparks fly with the kind of focused attention that came from knowing one mistake could cost him a week's profit. His phone buzzed. He ignored it. It buzzed again. Still ignored. The third time he glanced at the screen. Unknown number. He let it go to voicemail, returning his attention to the quarter-inch steel brackets lined up on his workbench. These were due tomorrow morning for a commercial renovation downtown, one of the contracts that kept lights on and cereal in the pantry. The knock on the workshop's side door made him look up. Nobody used that door. Clients came through the front, delivery guys used the loading bay, and friends, well, Daniel didn't have many of those anymore. Single parenthood had a way of narrowing your social circle to teachers, pediatricians, and the parents of Sophie's classmates, whose names you could never quite remember. He wiped his hands on his jeans and opened the door. Elena Harrington stood in the threshold like she'd stepped out of a different dimension entirely. Daniel had seen her before. Everyone in Chicago's manufacturing sector had seen Elena Harrington. Her face appeared in Crane's Chicago business at least once a quarter, usually accompanied by headlines about expansion, acquisition, or innovation. Harrington Industries was the firm that funded half the commercial construction in the city, which meant they were also the firm that contracted with suppliers like Daniel for custom metalwork. But the woman standing in his doorway didn't look like the polished CEO from those magazine covers. Her tailored black coat was buttoned unevenly. Her normally immaculate dark hair had strands falling loose around her face, and her eyes, sharp green eyes that had reportedly stared down union negotiators and city council members, looked exhausted. "Mr. Reed," she said, her voice clipped and professional despite everything else. "I need to speak with you. It's urgent." Daniel glanced past her at the black Mercedes idled in his gravel parking lot, engine running, driver waiting. "If this is about the Riverside project brackets, they'll be ready by Friday like we agreed. It's not about brackets." She stepped forward, and Daniel instinctively stepped back, letting her into the workshop. She looked around at the equipment, the half-finished projects, the poster of Sophie's class photo tacked to the wall above his desk. Her gaze lingered on that photo for a moment before returning to him. "I need to hire you for something. Unconventional." Daniel crossed his arms. He was 6'2" and broad-shouldered from years of manual labor, and he knew he cut an imposing figure when he wanted to. Right now, he wanted to. Something about this situation felt wrong. Not dangerous exactly, but complicated in ways he'd spent the last 7 years carefully avoiding. "I don't do unconventional, Ms. Harrington. I fabricate metal components according to specifications. That's it." "Elena," she corrected, then seemed to catch herself. "And I know what you do. Your work is excellent, precise, reliable, always on schedule. That's why several of our general contractors prefer working with you." She paused, seeming to gather herself. "What I'm asking for has nothing to do with metalwork." "Then I'm definitely not interested." Daniel moved back toward his workbench, a clear dismissal. "I need you to pretend to be my husband." The words hung in the air like smoke. Daniel turned slowly, certain he'd misheard. "You need me to what?" Elena's jaw tightened. She wasn't used to asking for things. That much was obvious. She was used to commanding, directing, deciding. "For one evening. A family dinner. This Friday night. You would attend as my spouse, behave appropriately, and leave. That's all. That's all, Daniel repeated flatly. He studied her face, looking for signs this was some kind of elaborate joke. Lady, I don't know what kind of arrangement you think. It's not. She closed her eyes briefly, and when she opened them again, Daniel saw something that caught him off guard. Genuine fear. My father is making a move to take control of my company. The board is nervous about leadership stability, and he's been planting seeds about my personal life being chaotic. He's convinced several board members that I'm too unfocused, too volatile, that the company needs seasoned leadership. The way she said those last words made them sound like poison. So get married, Daniel said. If that's what the board wants, I don't have time to get married. The professional veneer cracked. The vote is next week. My father has spent months positioning himself, and I've spent those same months focused on expanding our sustainable manufacturing division, securing contracts, building something that matters. I didn't see this coming until it was too late. Daniel leaned against his workbench, arms still crossed. Why me? You must know dozens of guys who'd be more convincing as your... He couldn't even finish the sentence. It was absurd. Because you're real, Elena said simply. Everyone in my circle is connected to the industry, to the board, to my father. Anyone I asked would have an angle, would use this as leverage later. She gestured at the workshop around them. You're outside all of that. You're a vendor, yes, but small enough not to have political connections. And you have a reputation for integrity. People say you keep your word. People say a lot of things. Daniel's mind was racing. This was insane, completely insane. And yet, what's in it for me? Money, Elena said immediately. $50,000, half up front, half after the dinner. The number hit Daniel like a physical blow. $50,000. Sophie's college fund was sitting at $12,000 after 7 years of scraping together whatever he could spare. $50,000 would mean real security. Would mean he could fix the CNC machine that kept breaking down instead of nursing it, along with spare parts and prayer. Would mean he could actually breathe for the first time since Sophie's mother had left them. That's a lot of money for one dinner, he said carefully. It's a lot of money because it's important, Elena replied. And because I'm asking you to lie convincingly to some very perceptive people. My father will interrogate you. He'll look for cracks in the story. If he finds them... She didn't finish, but Daniel could fill in the blanks. And if I say no, Elena's expression hardened, then I respect your decision and leave. But I need an answer now. I don't have time to find someone else. Daniel looked at the clock on the wall. 7:02 p.m. He was already going to be late for pickup. Mrs. Chen at the after-school program would give him that disappointed look she reserved for parents who couldn't manage their schedules. He'd apologize, again, and promise to do better, again. And Sophie would be fine, because Sophie was always fine. But he'd still feel like he was failing at the one job that actually mattered, $50,000. If I agree, Daniel said slowly, I need to know exactly what I'm walking into. Your father, what's his name? Robert Harrington. Robert Harrington? Daniel had heard that name before. Real estate developer, old money. The kind of man who appeared in news articles about historic preservation boards and downtown development committees. And he's trying to take your company because he's never forgiven me for refusing to run it his way, Elena said. There was something raw in her voice now, something that sounded like old wounds. Harrington Industries was his before it was mine. He built it from 3 hardware stores into a regional supplier. But he wanted expansion at any cost. Cheap materials, exploitative labor contracts, environmental shortcuts. When I took over 6 years ago, I started changing things. Slowly at first, then faster. We now source responsibly, pay fair wages, invest in sustainable practices. It's more expensive in the short term, but it's building something that will last. And he hates that, Daniel guessed. He sees it as weakness, as sentimentality. He's convinced the board that I'm running the company on feelings instead of business sense. Never mind that our profit margins have increased every year under my leadership. Never mind that we've expanded into 3 new states. He wants control back, and he's found a vulnerability. She met Daniel's eyes. Me. Specifically, my personal life, or lack thereof. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. So you need a stable-looking husband to prove you're not, what? Too independent? Too unmarriageable, Elena corrected bitterly. That's the narrative he's building, that I'm so difficult, so unwomanly, that no man would want me, that this proves I can't build lasting relationships, can't be trusted with long-term leadership. She laughed without humor. It's absurd, but it's working. And you think one dinner will fix this? I think one dinner will buy me time. If I show up with a husband, a real, believable husband who isn't obviously a hired escort or a business associate, it undermines his narrative, creates doubt, gives me space to rally board support before the vote. Elena's hands twisted together, the first truly nervous gesture Daniel had seen from her. I know how this sounds. I know I'm asking you to participate in a deception, but I'm out of options. Daniel thought about Sophie, about the conversation they'd had last week when she'd asked why they couldn't go on vacation like her friend Emma's family, about the way he'd explained that Daddy's business was growing, and growing businesses meant being careful with money, and maybe next year they could do something special, about the look of understanding on her 7-year-old face that no 7-year-old should have to wear, $50,000. I need details, he said. Everything. How we supposedly met, how long we've been married, what I do for a living. We'll work that out together, Elena said quickly, sensing his shift. I'll provide background. We'll rehearse. I'll make sure you're prepared for any questions. I won't let you go in blind. When is this dinner? Friday night, 7 o'clock, at my parents' estate in Lake Forest. 3 days. Daniel had 3 days to somehow become a convincing husband to a woman he'd met 10 minutes ago. A woman who lived in a world so far removed from his own that they might as well be different species. I need to pick up my daughter, he said abruptly. I'm already late. Elena blinked, clearly not expecting this response. Your daughter? Yes, of course. She reached into her coat and pulled out a business card, not the corporate ones she probably handed out at conferences, but a plain white card with just a phone number written in elegant script. Call me tonight after she's asleep. We'll discuss details. Daniel took the card. His hands were still dirty from work, and he left a smudge of machine oil across one corner. If I do this, and I'm not saying I will, but if I do, we need to be clear about something. My daughter comes first, always. If this arrangement threatens her stability in any way, I'm out. I don't care about the money. I don't care about contracts with your company. I don't care about any of it. She's the line. For the first time since entering his workshop, Elena smiled. It was small and tired, but genuine. I wouldn't trust you if you said anything else. Sophie was the last kid in the after-school room when Daniel arrived at 7:34 p.m. She sat at a small table with Mrs. Chen working on a drawing of what appeared to be a dragon fighting a robot. She looked up when he entered, and her face split into a smile that made his chest ache. Daddy, look what I made! That's amazing, sweetie. Daniel crouched down to examine the drawing properly. Is the dragon winning? They're friends, Sophie explained with the patience of someone talking to a not very bright adult. They're fighting the bad guy together. See? She pointed to a stick figure in the corner that appeared to be running away. I see. That's very smart teamwork. Daniel signed the late pickup sheet Mrs. Chen held out, avoiding her eyes. Sorry I'm late. Work ran over. It happens, Mrs. Chen said, but there was a note in her voice that suggested it happened too often. Sophie was wonderful, as always. The drive home was 14 minutes through streets that were just starting to empty out after rush hour. Sophie chattered about her day, something about a science experiment with vinegar and baking soda, something about Emma getting in trouble for talking during reading time, something about the new lunch lady who gave bigger portions. Daniel made the appropriate listening noises while his mind spun through the conversation with Elena Harrington. $50,000, but also lying to powerful people, entering a world he didn't understand, pretending to be someone he wasn't. And Sophie, always Sophie, the reason for every decision he made. Their apartment was small, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that barely deserved the name. But it was clean and safe, and in a good school district, which was all that mattered. Daniel had moved here when Sophie was 6 months old, after her mother had decided motherhood wasn't what she wanted after all. The divorce had been quick and brutal. Rachel had signed away custody without a fight, disappeared to Portland or Seattle or somewhere else that wasn't here, and sent exactly 3 cards in the 7 years since. One for Sophie's first birthday, one for her third, and then nothing. Daniel had learned to be both parents, had learned to braid hair badly and pack lunches adequately, and sign permission slips and attend parent-teacher conferences. Had learned to run a business during school hours and be fully present during homework time. Had learned to survive on 5 hours of sleep and make a single bag of groceries stretch further than seemed physically possible. And he'd learned that stability was everything. Consistency. Reliability. A world where Sophie knew what to expect, where she felt safe, where she could be a kid without worrying about grown-up problems. This thing Elena Harrington was asking him to do, it threatened all of that. Or did it? He made Sophie dinner, chicken nuggets and steamed broccoli, her favorite, while she set the table with the careful concentration she brought to everything. They ate together, talking about her day in more detail. She told him about the book her teacher was reading to the class, some adventure story about kids finding a magical tree. Daniel listened and asked questions and tried not to think about the business card in his pocket. After dinner, bath time, teeth brushing, the careful ritual of finding the right stuffed animal to sleep with. Tonight it was Mr. Bear, who'd been demoted last week but was apparently back in favor. Daniel read 2 chapters of the magical tree book, his daughter warm and sleepy against his side. "Daddy?" Sophie's voice was soft, almost asleep. "Are we going to be okay?" The question hit him like a punch. "Of course we are, sweetheart. Why would you ask that?" Emma's dad lost his job. She said they might have to move schools. Sophie's eyes were half closed, fighting sleep. "You won't lose your job, right?" "I work for myself, remember? I can't lose my job." He kissed her forehead. "We're going to be fine. I promise." She was asleep within minutes, her breathing evening out into the soft rhythm of childhood dreams. Daniel sat there for a long time, watching her sleep, thinking about promises and stability and $50,000. At 9:30 p.m., after checking on Sophie twice more, Daniel finally pulled out Elena's card and dialed the number. She answered on the second ring. "Reed?" "Yeah." Daniel stood at his kitchen window, looking out at the street below. "I need to understand something. Why is this dinner so important? What happens if you just show up alone and tell your father to back off?" Elena was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was different, less polished, more human. "My father doesn't respond to direct confrontation. He sees it as proof he's gotten under your skin, but he does respond to optics, to appearances. If I show up alone, I'm confirming his narrative. If I show up with a husband, a believable one, I'm demonstrating stability, partnership, the kind of traditional values he claims I lack." She paused. "It's manipulative. I know that. But I learned from the best." "And after the dinner, what's the end game?" "The board vote is next Tuesday. If I can get through this dinner without my father finding ammunition to use against me, I should have enough support to maintain control. After that," she sighed, "after that we quietly separate. You go back to your life, I go back to mine. Clean and simple." Nothing about this was clean or simple, but Daniel understood the logic. "Your father will investigate me. You know that, right? The moment you introduce me as your husband, he's going to dig into my background." "I know. That's why I chose you. Your background is solid. Military service, honorable discharge, small business owner, single father with full custody. There's nothing there he can use." Daniel felt a chill. "You've already investigated me." "Due diligence," Elena said, without apology. "I wouldn't have come to you without knowing who you were. I needed someone clean, someone real, someone you could control." "Someone I could trust," Elena corrected. "There's a difference." Daniel thought about this. "What do you get if you lose? If your father takes control?" "I become a figurehead, maybe a VP title, maybe just a board seat with no real power. He'll undo everything I've built, the sustainable initiatives, the fair labor contracts, all of it. He'll strip the company for parts if it means better quarterly profits." Her voice hardened. "And I'll have to watch." "That's not an answer. What do you get?" Another pause. A trust fund, a nice office, an excellent salary. All the trappings of success with none of the actual control. Some women would be thrilled. The bitterness in her voice was sharp enough to cut. I'm not some women. Daniel made his decision. Friday dinner, that's it. I'm there as your husband, I play the part, I leave. Afterward, all contracts between your company and mine continue as normal. No favoritism, no special treatment, no leverage. $50,000. Like you said, half up front, half after. Agreed. And you provide everything I need to know, background story, family details, your father's weak points. I'm not walking into this blind. I'll send a car tomorrow evening, 6 o'clock. We'll meet at my office and go through everything. Elena's voice shifted into business mode, decisive and clear. Wear something business casual, not a suit, but not work clothes either. I'll manage, Daniel said dryly. Read, Daniel. She caught herself. Thank you. I know this is unusual. That's one word for it. Daniel looked at Sophie's closed bedroom door. See you tomorrow. He hung up and immediately opened his banking app. Rent was due in 5 days. The CNC machine needed repairs he'd been putting off for 2 months. Sophie's winter coat was getting too small, and her shoes would need replacing before spring. The numbers on his screen told a familiar story. Getting by, but barely. Always barely. $50,000 would change that. Not permanently, he wasn't naive enough to think one payday solved everything. But it would buy breathing room, would buy security, would buy the ability to say yes when his daughter asked for things, instead of always calculating whether they could afford it. He thought about what Elena had said. I need someone I can trust. The irony wasn't lost on him. She was hiring him to lie, to pretend, to participate in a deception designed to manipulate her own board of directors. And she called it trust. But Daniel understood something Elena probably didn't. There were different kinds of lies. There were the lies that destroyed, and there were the lies that protected. The lies that served selfishness, and the lies that served survival. He'd spent 7 years lying by omission every time someone asked how Sophie's mother was doing, saying, she's not in the picture, instead of, she abandoned her infant daughter without looking back. That lie protected Sophie from a truth she didn't need to carry. Maybe this was the same. A lie in service of something worth protecting. Or maybe he was just good at justifying whatever he needed to do to survive. Daniel checked on Sophie one more time before bed. She'd kicked off her blankets and was sprawled across the mattress like a starfish. He covered her gently, watching her small chest rise and fall. It's going to be okay, he whispered. I promise. He just hoped it was a promise he could keep. Wednesday evening arrived faster than Daniel expected. He'd spent the day finishing the Riverside project brackets, working with the kind of fierce concentration that left no room for second thoughts. At 5:30, he closed up the workshop, picked up Sophie, and dropped her at their neighbor Mrs. Rodriguez's apartment. You look nervous, mijo, Mrs. Rodriguez observed, taking Sophie's backpack. She was in her 60s, a retired teacher who'd lived in the building for 20 years and had appointed herself the unofficial grandmother to every kid on the floor. Important meeting, Daniel said. Business stuff. Sophie tugged on his sleeve. What kind of business stuff? The boring kind. He kissed her forehead. Be good for Mrs. Rodriguez. I'll pick you up in a couple hours. The Mercedes arrived exactly at 6. Same driver as before, a middle-aged man with the neutral expression of someone who'd learned not to ask questions. The drive to Harrington Industries' downtown office took 35 minutes through traffic that seemed personally designed to increase Daniel's anxiety. Elena's office occupied the entire top floor of a glass and steel tower near Millennium Park. The elevator opened directly into a reception area that probably cost more than Daniel's annual revenue. Sleek furniture, abstract art, floor-to-ceiling windows showing the city lights beginning to glow in the dusk. Elena was waiting, and Daniel barely recognized her. Gone was the disheveled woman who'd appeared in his workshop. This version wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than his truck, her hair pulled back in a style that was both severe and elegant. She looked every inch the CEO, confident, controlled, powerful. Then she saw him and smiled, and the human being from his workshop reappeared for just a moment. Thank you for coming. Let's go to the conference room, more comfortable for going through everything. The conference room had a table that could seat 20 and windows that framed the Chicago skyline like a photograph. Elena had papers spread across one end, documents, notes, what looked like family trees. Coffee, she offered. There's a machine in the corner. It's Italian, does 17 different types. Black is fine, Daniel said, because the machine looked complicated enough to require an engineering degree. Elena handed him a folder. This is us, our story. Daniel opened it and found himself looking at a timeline. We met 2 years ago at a charity fundraiser, he read aloud. You were there representing Harrington Industries. I was there because one of your clients invited you. Marcus Chen. He's a general contractor we work with regularly. Real person, will back up the story if asked. Elena sat across from him. The fundraiser was for children's literacy programs. You attended because of Sophie, because education matters to you. We met at the bar, started talking, discovered shared values. Shared values, Daniel repeated. Such as? Quality over quantity, building things that last, responsibility to the people who depend on you. Elena met his eyes. Not lies, actually. Based on what I know about you, those are your values. And you fell for a blue-collar metal worker because you're real. Because you didn't care who I was or what my company does. Because you saw me as Elena, not as the Harrington Industries CEO. She said it matter-of-factly, like she was describing a product specification. We dated quietly for a year before getting married in a small ceremony 6 months ago. Small because neither of us wanted a circus, and because your daughter needed time to adjust to having me in her life. Daniel looked up sharply. Sophie's part of this story? She has to be. You're a single father. That's not something you hide. But don't worry, she never has to meet anyone from my world. As far as my family knows, she's shy around strangers, still warming up to me. It explains why I haven't brought her to family events. Convenient, Daniel said, but he had to admit it made sense. What else? They spent the next hour building a life that never existed. Elena had thought of everything, where they went on their first date, a small Italian restaurant in Lincoln Park. What Daniel's proposal had been like. Quiet, private, at the workshop after hours. Why they'd kept the relationship secret initially, to protect both their professional reputations. Why they were going public now, because Elena was tired of hiding something important. My father will ask about your business, Elena said. He'll want to know financials, client list, growth projections. He'll be looking for signs you're after my money. I'll tell him the truth that Reed Fabrication is small but stable, that I specialize in custom architectural metalwork, that I plan to grow carefully rather than rapidly. He'll see that as lack of ambition. Maybe, Daniel said, or maybe he'll see it as someone who understands his limitations, who'd rather do excellent work at a small scale than mediocre work at a large scale. Elena studied him. You're not intimidated by this, are you? By him? I'm terrified, Daniel admitted, but not of your father. I'm terrified of screwing this up and having it blow back on my daughter. Your father? He shrugged. He's just another client who thinks he knows more than I do because he's got more money. I deal with that every week. Something flickered in Elena's expression. Surprise, maybe, or respect. Most people find him overwhelming. Most people probably need something from him. Daniel closed the folder. I don't. After Friday, I go back to my life. You go back to yours. He's got no leverage over me. Except the $50,000. Which you're paying me regardless of how dinner goes, Daniel said. That was the deal. I show up, I play the part. Whether your father believes it or not isn't my responsibility. Actually, it is, Elena said quietly. If he doesn't believe it, I lose, so the whole point is convincing him. Then tell me what convinces him. Elena stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city. Strength, but not the obvious kind. My father respects people who don't bend, but he destroys people who confront him directly. You need to be immovable without being confrontational, like... She searched for words. Like a tree. He can push against it, but it doesn't push back. It just stands there, rooted, unbothered. I can do immovable, Daniel said. Been doing it for 7 years. Elena turned back to face him. Why did her mother leave? If you don't mind me asking. The question caught Daniel off guard. That's not in the background file. I didn't investigate your personal life that deeply. It felt invasive. Elena returned to her seat. But if we're married, I should know. Daniel considered deflecting, then decided against it. If they were going to sell this, she needed real information. Rachel decided 6 months after Sophie was born that motherhood wasn't what she wanted. She'd been clear during the pregnancy that she wasn't sure, but I thought, he shrugged. I thought once Sophie was here, once she saw her, it would change. It didn't. She stayed long enough to establish that she wasn't a danger to Sophie, signed away custody, and left. I'm sorry. Don't be. She did the right thing, left instead of staying and resenting us both. Not every parent has that self-awareness. Daniel's voice was matter-of-fact. He'd had 7 years to make peace with it. Sophie asks sometimes, but less as she gets older. I think she's figured out that the parent who shows up is worth more than the one who doesn't. Elena nodded slowly. My mother died when I was 12. Cancer. After that, it was just my father and me. He threw himself into the business, and She smiled without humor. I tried to become what he needed. Perfect grades, business degree, MBA. Joined the company, worked my way up even though everyone knew I'd eventually inherit it. I thought if I was good enough, smart enough, he'd see me as a real leader, as his partner. But he didn't. He sees me as a placeholder, as someone keeping his seat warm until he decides he wants it back. She looked directly at Daniel. That's what this dinner is really about. Not the board, not company stability, him reminding me that nothing I build is really mine. Daniel understood that, understood the weight of trying to prove yourself to someone who'd already decided you weren't enough. So we show him he's wrong. We show him I'm not alone, Elena corrected, that I've built something in my personal life, that I'm capable of partnership and commitment, that I'm not the unstable, unmarriageable daughter he's painted me as. Using a fake marriage. Using theater, Elena said. My father wrote the script. I'm just casting the right actor. Daniel had to laugh at that. Is that what I am? An actor? You're a man doing what he needs to do to protect his child, Elena said simply. Same as me. We're both just trying to protect what matters. The conversation shifted to logistics, what Daniel should wear, business attire but not overly formal, when they'd arrive, exactly on time, not early, how they'd present themselves, comfortable with each other but not overly affectionate. Elena provided a dossier on her family, her father Robert, her uncle Thomas, who'd be there with his wife Patricia, her cousin James, who worked in the company's finance division. James is harmless, Elena said. Patricia will try to bond with you over having children. She has 3 boys. Thomas will talk your ear off about golf if you let him. It's my father you need to focus on. What does he care about, besides control? Legacy. The Harrington name. He built something from nothing, and he wants to be remembered for that. He wants the company to carry on his vision, his values. Elena's voice hardened. Even if those values are outdated and destructive. By the time they finished, it was past 8 o'clock. Daniel's phone buzzed. Mrs. Rodriguez, probably wondering when he'd pick up Sophie. I need to go, he said, standing. Elena stood as well. I'll have the first payment transferred tonight. $25,000. You trust me not to take the money and disappear? You won't, Elena said with certainty. You keep your promises. It's in every reference your clients gave, every interaction I've observed. You're reliable. She said it like it was the highest compliment she could offer. Maybe in her world it was. The elevator ride down felt longer than the ride up. Daniel watched the floor numbers decrease and thought about what he'd agreed to. 2 days from now, he'd walk into a mansion in Lake Forest and pretend to be married to a woman he barely knew. He'd look her powerful father in the eye and lie about their life together. He'd risk everything on the belief that he could be convincing enough, steady enough, real enough to sell a fiction. For $50,000. For Sophie's future. For a woman who'd looked at him and seen not a vendor or a blue-collar worker, but someone she could trust. The driver took him back to his building. Daniel climbed the stairs to Mrs. Rodriguez's apartment, where Sophie was asleep on the couch with a blanket over her. She tried to wait up, Mrs. Rodriguez said softly. But it's past bedtime. I know. I'm sorry. Daniel carefully gathered Sophie into his arms. She was getting too big for this, would probably be too heavy to carry soon, but tonight she curled against his chest, still small enough, still his little girl. "Everything okay, mijo?" Mrs. Rodriguez asked. "You seem different." "Just business," Daniel said. "Hopefully good business." He carried Sophie back to their apartment, tucked her into bed without waking her, and sat in his kitchen checking his bank account on his phone. At 9:47 p.m., the balance updated. $25,000 deposited from Harrington Industries payroll. Real money, real commitment. This was actually happening. Daniel thought about calling it off, thought about transferring the money back, telling Elena he couldn't do it, going back to his simple life where the biggest stress was late deliveries and equipment breakdowns. But he thought about Sophie asking if they were going to be okay, about the fear in her voice that no 7-year-old should feel, about the power of being able to promise her security and actually deliver it. Sometimes protection meant lying. Sometimes survival meant becoming someone you weren't. Sometimes a single father did what needed to be done, regardless of how uncomfortable it made him. Daniel set his phone down and looked at Friday on the calendar. 2 days. He'd better find something to wear. Friday arrived with the kind of cold that made Chicago feel personal in its hostility. Daniel dropped Sophie at school that morning with careful normalcy. Same goodbye routine, same reminder to listen to her teacher, same promise to pick her up on time. She had no idea tonight would be different. No idea her father would spend the evening in Lake Forest pretending to be someone's husband. That was intentional. The less Sophie knew, the less she could accidentally reveal if anyone ever asked questions. Not that anyone would. After tonight, this whole arrangement would dissolve like it never happened. The suit hanging in Daniel's bedroom closet told a different story. He'd bought it yesterday at a department store in the Loop, standing in front of mirrors while a saleswoman with kind eyes helped him find something that fit his broad shoulders without looking cheap. "Navy blue," she'd said. "Classic." Conservative enough to read as serious, modern enough not to look dated. He'd nodded and handed over his card, watching $300 disappear for clothes he'd wear once. 300 out of 25,000, he'd reminded himself. Still a net gain. Now, at 4 in the afternoon, he stood in his bathroom shaving with more care than usual. The face in the mirror looked the same as always. Strong jaw, gray eyes that Sophie had inherited. The kind of weathered handsomeness that came from physical work rather than gym memberships. But today that face needed to belong to someone else. To Elena Harrington's husband. To a man comfortable in rooms where the art costs more than cars. His phone buzzed. "Elena. Car arrives at 5:45. We'll drive together. Are you ready?" Daniel typed back. "As ready as I'll get." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally. "Thank you for doing this." He didn't respond. Thanks felt premature. Thank him after, if this worked. Thank him if her father bought the performance, and the board vote went her way, and she kept her company. Thank him when it was over, and they could both pretend it never happened. Mrs. Rodriguez took Sophie again with the same knowing look she'd worn Wednesday night. "Another business meeting?" "Something like that." Daniel kissed Sophie's forehead, breathing in the strawberry shampoo smell of her hair. "Be good. I'll be back before bedtime." "You promise?" The question hit harder than it should have. "I promise, sweetheart." The Mercedes arrived exactly on time, but this time when Daniel climbed in, Elena was already in the back seat. She wore a dress the color of deep wine, elegant without being flashy, her hair swept up to expose the line of her neck. She looked beautiful in the way expensive things were beautiful, carefully crafted, intentionally designed. "You clean up well," she said, assessing his suit. "So do you." Daniel settled into the leather seat, hyper-aware of the space between them. "We should probably practice looking comfortable together." "We have 45 minutes. Elena shifted slightly closer. Not touching, but close enough that he could smell her perfume, something subtle that probably had a French name. "Tell me about Sophie, something real. If my father asks about her, I should know more than what's in the file." Daniel watched the city scroll past through tinted windows. "She wants to be a veterinarian. Has wanted to since she was 5, and we found an injured bird in the park. We took it to a clinic, and the vet let her help wrap its wing. She's been obsessed ever since." He smiled despite himself. She makes me check books about animals out of the library every week. Last month, she informed me that capybaras are the world's largest rodents and also everyone's friend. Elena laughed, and it sounded genuine. Does she understand what you do? Your work? She knows I make things out of metal. She's been to the workshop 100 times, knows how to safely watch the machines work. Sometimes she draws designs and asks if I can build them. Daniel pulled out his phone, showing Elena a photo of a wonky metal butterfly he'd fabricated from Sophie's sketch. She wanted one for her teacher's birthday. You made that from a child's drawing? I made it from my daughter's vision, Daniel corrected. There's a difference. Elena studied the photo, then looked at him with something that might have been respect. You're a better father than most people are parents. I'm the only parent she has. Better isn't optional. They fell into silence as the city gave way to suburbs, then to the sprawling estates of Lake Forest. Old money lived out here, the kind that didn't need to announce itself. The houses sat far back from the road, protected by gates and mature trees, and the kind of privacy that came with acreage. The Harrington estate appeared at the end of a long driveway lined with oaks that had probably been planted before Daniel was born. The house itself was stone and timber, designed to look like an English country manor despite being only 40 years old. Lights glowed in every window, warm and welcoming in a way that felt deliberately staged. Last chance, Elena said quietly as the car slowed. If you want out, say so now. Daniel looked at her. Really looked. Beneath the makeup and the expensive dress and the CEO armor, he saw fear. Raw and real and human. She was terrified of what waited inside that house, terrified of her father's power and her own vulnerability, terrified of losing everything she'd built. He understood that terror, lived with his own version every day. The fear that one wrong move, one bad contract, one sick week without income would topple everything he'd constructed for Sophie. We're doing this, he said. Elena's hand found his, cold and trembling slightly. Remember, we're married, comfortable with each other. You're not intimidated by the wealth or the family name. You're here because you love me, not because you're impressed by any of this. Got it. Daniel squeezed her hand once, then released it. Let's go meet your father. The front door opened before they reached it. A woman in her 50s wearing an understated black dress smiled at them with professional warmth. Miss Harrington, welcome home. Thank you, Margaret. Elena stepped inside and Daniel followed. This is my husband, Daniel Reed. Daniel, Margaret manages the household. Pleasure to meet you, Mr. Reed. Margaret took their coats with the efficiency of someone who'd been doing this for decades. Everyone's gathered in the library. Shall I let them know you've arrived? We'll announce ourselves, Elena said. She threaded her arm through Daniel's, the gesture so natural he almost believed it himself. Ready? Daniel nodded. They walked through a foyer that could have fit his entire apartment, past artwork that belonged in museums, toward voices and laughter coming from an open doorway. The library was 2 stories of books and leather furniture and a fireplace large enough to stand in. 4 people turned as Elena and Daniel entered. Daniel recognized Robert Harrington immediately, tall and silver-haired, wearing a cardigan that probably cost more than the suit Daniel had on. He had Elena's sharp green eyes, but none of her warmth. Elena, Robert's voice carried the kind of authority that expected obedience. You're late. We're exactly on time, Father. Elena's voice stayed level. I'd like you to meet my husband, Daniel Reed. Daniel, this is my father, Robert, my uncle Thomas, and his wife Patricia, and my cousin James. Daniel stepped forward, extending his hand to Robert. Mr. Harrington, thank you for having me. Robert's handshake was firm, assessing. His eyes traveled over Daniel's suit, his haircut, his shoes, looking for weaknesses. Reed, Elena's mentioned you, though not as often as one might expect given you're supposedly married. We prefer to keep our personal life private, Daniel said evenly, especially given how public Elena's professional life is. Interesting. Robert released his hand but didn't step back. And what is it you do, Daniel? Elena was vague on the details. I own a metal fabrication shop, custom architectural components mainly, railings, brackets, decorative pieces for commercial and high-end residential projects. A tradesman. Robert made it sound like an observation and an insult simultaneously. A craftsman, Daniel corrected without heat. There's a difference. Thomas bustled forward, breaking the tension. He was shorter than his brother, rounder, with the kind face of someone who'd never had to be ruthless. Daniel, welcome to the family, such as it is. I'm Thomas. This is my wife, Patricia. We're delighted Elena finally brought you around. Patricia was blonde and warm, immediately pulling Daniel into a hug that felt genuine. Elena's been so secretive about you. I was beginning to think you were imaginary. Do you have children? Elena mentioned a daughter. Sophie, she's 7. Daniel accepted a drink from a server who'd appeared silently. She's staying with a neighbor tonight. Oh, you should have brought her. Patricia's enthusiasm seemed real. Our boys would have loved meeting her. Maybe next time, Elena said smoothly, her hand finding the small of Daniel's back. Sophie's still adjusting to having me in her life. We're taking things slowly. James approached with a friendly smile. He was younger than Elena, maybe early 30s, with the soft build of someone who worked at a desk. The mysterious husband finally appears. I'm James. Fair warning, my mother's going to interrogate you about everything from your favorite food to your political views. I'll do my best to survive, Daniel said, and James laughed. Dinner was announced, and they moved to a dining room with a table that could seat 20, but was set for 6 at one end. Daniel found himself between Patricia and Elena, with Robert directly across. Strategic placement, he realized. Robert wanted him in direct sightline. The first course appeared, some kind of soup with ingredients Daniel couldn't identify. He followed Elena's lead with the silverware, grateful for the crash course she'd given him on formal dining etiquette. So, Daniel, Robert's voice cut through the casual conversation. Tell us how you and Elena met. I'm fascinated by this story. Daniel set down his spoon, meeting Robert's gaze steadily. A charity fundraiser 2 years ago, children's literacy program. One of my clients invited me, and I decided to go since education's important with Sophie. Elena was there, representing Harrington Industries. And you approached her? Robert's tone suggested this was unlikely. Actually, we both reached for the same glass of wine at the bar. Elena's laugh sounded natural. Ended up talking for 2 hours. I didn't even tell him what I did for a living at first. Why not? Patricia asked, leaning forward with interest. Because I wanted to be just Elena for a while, Elena said quietly. Not the CEO, not the Harrington heir. Just a woman having a conversation with an interesting man. Daniel felt the truth in those words, even as he knew the story was fiction. I found out about her company later when I looked her up online. Almost didn't call her back because I figured we were from different worlds. But you did call, Thomas said warmly. I did. Daniel looked at Elena, and the lie felt easier than it should have. Because the conversation had been the best I'd had in years, and I wanted more of them. Robert wasn't buying it. And when did this conversation become a marriage? Elena's been notably silent about her personal life for the past 6 months. We got married at City Hall, Daniel said. Small ceremony, just us and Sophie and a couple of witnesses. Neither of us wanted a production. Elena's work schedule was intense, my business was growing, and we both agreed that the relationship mattered more than the wedding. How convenient, Robert said. No guests, no photos, no evidence. We have evidence. Elena pulled out her phone, showing photos Daniel hadn't seen before. Courthouse steps, them signing papers, a small celebration afterward. She'd prepared thoroughly. And we have a marriage certificate. Would you like to see it, Father? The table went quiet. Patricia looked uncomfortable. Thomas focused intently on his soup. James seemed to be fighting a smile. Robert's jaw tightened. That won't be necessary. I'm simply trying to understand why my daughter felt the need to hide such an important development. I didn't hide it, Elena said. I protected it. There's a difference. Protected it from what? From this. Elena gestured at the table. From interrogation masquerading as concern, from having something personal dissected and judged and used as ammunition. I am your father, Robert said coldly, not your enemy. Then stop treating my marriage like a business merger you need to approve. The words hung in the air like smoke. Daniel watched Robert's face shift from surprise to anger to something that looked almost like pain. For a moment, the powerful CEO disappeared and Daniel saw just an old man whose daughter had learned not to trust him. Patricia cleared her throat. The soup is delicious. Margaret's outdone herself. The conversation shifted, fracturing into smaller exchanges. Patricia asked Daniel about Sophie's interests, and he found himself genuinely enjoying talking about his daughter's love of animals, and her terrible jokes and the way she hummed while drawing. Thomas discussed golf with James, while Elena and Robert maintained a careful silence. The main course arrived, some kind of roasted meat with vegetables arranged like art. Daniel ate and answered questions and watched Robert watch him. The older man was studying every gesture, every word, looking for the crack in the facade. "Tell me about your business, Daniel," Robert said during a lull. "Reed Fabrication, is it?" "Yes, sir." "Revenue?" Elena stiffened beside him, but Daniel kept his voice level. "We did about 200,000 last year, on track for 250 this year." "Modest," Robert said, making it sound like failure. "Sustainable," Daniel corrected. "I could grow faster, but that would mean sacrificing quality or hiring people I'm not ready to properly train. I'd rather do excellent work at a smaller scale." "That's an interesting philosophy. Some might call it lack of ambition." "Some might," Daniel agreed. "Others might call it understanding your capacity and working within it. Not everything needs to scale infinitely to have value." Robert's eyes narrowed. "Are you implying something about Harrington Industries?" "I'm not implying anything about anyone's business except my own." Daniel met Robert's gaze without flinching. "I know my limitations. I know what I can do well and what I can't. That self-awareness has kept me in business for 8 years, and kept you small, and kept me solvent, with a reputation for reliability that brings repeat clients." Daniel picked up his water glass. "I don't need to be the biggest shop in Chicago. I just need to be good enough that people keep calling." "Admirable," Robert said, though his tone suggested the opposite. "And how does it feel being married to someone whose company revenue last year was over 300 million? The question was designed to make Daniel feel small, to emphasize the gap between them, to suggest he was punching above his weight class. Daniel considered his response carefully. "It feels like I married a woman, not a balance sheet. Elena's work is impressive, but it's not why I love her." "Why do you love her?" Robert asked bluntly. The table went silent again. Patricia looked scandalized. Thomas coughed into his napkin. James stared at his plate. Elena's hand found Daniel's under the table, squeezing hard. Daniel thought about the woman who'd walked into his workshop with fear in her eyes. The woman who'd built something worth protecting. The woman who was willing to do whatever it took to keep her father from destroying what she'd created. "Because she's brave," Daniel said simply. "Because she doesn't back down when things get hard. Because she cares about doing things right even when doing them wrong would be easier." He looked at Elena. "And because when she talks about her work, her whole face lights up. She loves what she does, and that passion is beautiful to watch." Elena's eyes were bright, and Daniel realized with a start that he'd meant every word. Maybe not in the context of romance, but as truth about who she was. Robert seemed taken aback. For the first time that evening, he had no immediate response. Patricia dabbed at her eyes. "That's lovely, Daniel. Truly lovely." "It's words," Robert said, recovering. "Anyone can say beautiful things." "True," Daniel agreed. "But I found that people who love you show it in what they do, not just what they say. Elena supports my business even though it's small. She makes time for Sophie even though her schedule's insane. She respects that my daughter comes first, always, and never asks me to compromise on that." He paused. "Those actions matter more than any words I could say here." Elena was staring at him, and Daniel realized he'd gone off script. They hadn't prepared for her father to ask directly why he loved her, but the answer had come naturally, built from the truth of what he'd observed about her character. Robert stood abruptly. "I need air. Excuse me?" He left the dining room, and the tension broke like a snapped wire. Thomas exhaled heavily. Patricia reached across to squeeze Elena's hand. James finally looked up from his plate. "Well," James said, "that went better than expected." "Did it?" Elena's voice was shaky. "He left instead of escalating," Thomas said. "That's progress. Usually he'd stay and keep pushing until someone cracked." "Daniel didn't crack," Patricia observed, looking at him with something like admiration. "You stood your ground without being confrontational. That's not easy with Robert. Daniel didn't know what to say. He'd just told the truth as he saw it, filtered through the lens of their fictional marriage. Apparently that was enough. Elena stood. I should check on him. Let me, Daniel said, surprising himself. If we're selling this marriage, I should be able to handle your father one-on-one. Elena looked uncertain, but Thomas nodded. That's actually smart. Shows you're not intimidated. That you see him as family, not as a threat. Where would he go? Daniel asked. The study, Elena said. Down the hall, third door on the left. But Daniel, I'll be fine. He squeezed her shoulder, the gesture feeling more natural than it should. Trust me. He found Robert in a wood-paneled room lined with photographs, the Harrington family history displayed like trophies. Robert stood in front of a particular photo, hands in his pockets, staring at a young girl on a bicycle. That's Elena, Robert said without turning. She was 8, stubborn even then, refused training wheels long after other children needed them. Fell dozens of times, skinned knees, bloody elbows. I told her mother to make her stop, that she was being ridiculous. He smiled slightly. Her mother said stubbornness was a virtue if you were stubborn about the right things. Daniel moved closer, looking at the photo. The girl's face was determined, focused. He could see Sophie in that expression. She got her stubbornness from you, Daniel said, and her need to prove herself. Robert finally turned. What do you want from my daughter, Mr. Reed? The formal address was deliberate. They were no longer playing at family dinner. Nothing she isn't freely giving, Daniel said. I don't want her money. Don't want her connections. Don't want anything except what we already have. Which is? Partnership, respect. Someone to come home to who understands what it means to build something worth protecting. Robert moved to a leather chair, gesturing for Daniel to sit across from him. I built Harrington Industries from 3 hardware stores. Do you understand what that took? The hours, the sacrifice, the difficult decisions? I made that company into something that matters. I know, Daniel said. Elena's told me. Has she told you I did it so she'd have something? So my daughter would never have to struggle, never have to worry, never have to compromise herself for survival? Robert's voice was rough. Everything I built was for her. Then let her have it, Daniel said quietly. Actually have it. Not as something you're holding in trust until you decide she's worthy. Not as something you can take back when she makes decisions you don't like. As hers. Truly hers. She's making mistakes, expensive mistakes, sustainable materials, fair wages. These things sound noble, but they cut into margins. They also build loyalty, both customer loyalty and employee loyalty. Boy, Daniel leaned forward. I run my business the same way. I pay my suppliers fairly. I pay myself last. I invest in quality materials even when cheaper options exist. And you know what? My clients come back. They recommend me. They trust that what I build will last. That works at your scale, Robert said dismissively. But at your scale, it works better, Daniel interrupted, because you've got the capital to weather short-term lower margins in exchange for long-term stability. Elena's not being sentimental. She's being smart. She's building a company that will outlast both of you because it's built on something more solid than quarterly profits. Robert studied him. You believe that. I know that. I've watched companies like yours churn through suppliers, always looking for the cheapest option, never building relationships. And I've watched those companies struggle when times get hard because nobody's loyal to them. Elena's building loyalty. That's valuable. She's building vulnerability, Robert said. The board sees her as weak. Then the board's wrong. Daniel's voice was firm. Strength isn't about never bending. It's about knowing what you'll bend on and what you won't. Elena bends on methods, but not on values. That's not weakness. That's integrity. Robert was quiet for a long moment. You really believe in her. I do. That at least was completely true. Even though she kept you hidden, even though she's only bringing you forward now because it serves her purposes? Daniel smiled slightly. She kept me hidden because she was protecting something she valued, because she knew the moment she made us public this would happen. The questions, the judgment, the assumption that I'm after something. I respect that protection. It shows she thinks ahead. Or it shows she's ashamed of you. The words were designed to wound, but Daniel had dealt with worse. had dealt with 7 years of Rachel's family implying he'd trapped their daughter. 7 years of other parents at Sophie's school assuming a single father was somehow inadequate. 7 years of proving himself over and over. If Elena were ashamed of me, I wouldn't be here, Daniel said calmly. She'd have found someone more impressive to parade in front of you, someone with the right education, the right background, the right pedigree. Instead, she brought me, a metal worker with calloused hands and a kid and a $200,000 business. That tells me she's not playing to your expectations. She's living her truth. Robert laughed, and it sounded genuine. You're either very confident or very naive, Mr. Reed. I'm very clear about who I am, Daniel said, and I'm very clear that Elena chose me knowing exactly who I am. That's enough. They sat in silence, and Daniel watched Robert's face shift through several emotions. Finally, the older man stood. Dessert will be served soon. We should return. Daniel stood as well. Mr. Harrington, Robert, I know you don't trust this. Don't trust me. That's fair. But I'm asking you to trust Elena. Trust that she knows what she's doing with the company and with her life. Robert paused at the door. And if I can't, then you'll lose her, Daniel said simply. Maybe not legally, maybe not professionally, but you'll lose the relationship. And from what I've seen, that would hurt you both. Robert's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. They returned to the dining room together, and Daniel caught Elena's eye. She looked terrified, searching his face for signs of how it had gone. He gave her a small nod. Not a promise that everything was fixed, but a signal that he'd held the line. Dessert was some elaborate chocolate creation that tasted expensive. The conversation stayed light. Patricia's garden plans, James's thoughts on expanding into green technology, Thomas's upcoming golf tournament. Robert was quiet, watching Daniel and Elena with an expression that was harder to read than before. As coffee was served, Robert finally spoke. Elena, I'd like to discuss the board meeting Tuesday, perhaps tomorrow, at the office? Elena's hand found Daniel's under the table again. Of course, Father. Good. Robert's gaze shifted to Daniel. Mr. Reed, it was illuminating to meet you. Likewise, sir. The evening wound down. Patricia hugged them both goodbye, making Elena promise to bring Sophie next time. Thomas shook Daniel's hand with genuine warmth. James clapped him on the shoulder and whispered, You survived. That's impressive. Robert walked them to the door personally, which Margaret indicated was unusual. He shook Daniel's hand again, and this time the assessment in his eyes was different. Not acceptance exactly, but recognition. Take care of my daughter, Robert said quietly. Always, Daniel replied, and meant it in ways that had nothing to do with their arrangement. The Mercedes ride back to the city was silent for the first 10 minutes. Elena stared out the window, her hands twisted together in her lap. Finally, she spoke. What did you say to him? In the study? Daniel considered his answer. The truth. That you're building something worth protecting. That strength isn't about never bending, that he should trust you to know what you're doing. And he listened? I don't know if he listened, but he heard. Daniel looked at her profile in the passing streetlights. What happens now? Now we wait. The board meets Tuesday. He'll either use tonight as evidence that I'm stable and committed, or he'll find a way to twist it into more proof that I'm not fit to lead. Elena finally turned to face him. But Daniel, what you said at dinner about why you love me, that was off script. I know. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. It was perfect. It was exactly what needed to be said. She smiled slightly. And some of it was even true, wasn't it? Most of it, Daniel admitted. You are brave. You don't back down. And watching you talk about your work, even in our few conversations, I've seen that passion. Those weren't lies. Just context that was fictional. Just context, Daniel agreed. They rode in silence again until they reached his neighborhood. The driver pulled up to his building, and Daniel realized this might be goodbye. The dinner was done. The performance complete. After the board vote, Elena would transfer the rest of the money and they'd go back to their separate lives. I'll let you know how Tuesday goes, Elena said. And I'll have the final payment processed regardless of outcome. You held up your end. Good luck, Daniel said. He meant it. He climbed out of the Mercedes and watched it pull away, Elena's face visible through the rear window until the car turned the corner. Then he took the stairs to his apartment, where Mrs. Rodriguez was reading on his couch, while Sophie slept in her room. "How was your meeting?" Mrs. Rodriguez asked, gathering her things. "Complicated," Daniel said honestly. "But I think it went okay." After she left, Daniel checked on Sophie. She was sprawled across her bed, Mr. Bear clutched to her chest, completely at peace. He stood there watching her breathe, grounding himself in what was real. This apartment, this child, this life they'd built together. The rest, the mansion in Lake Forest, the performance as Elena's husband, the world of board meetings and corporate warfare. That wasn't real. Couldn't be real. But as Daniel changed out of his expensive suit and washed the gel from his hair, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, that the lies he'd told tonight had contained enough truth to be dangerous. He'd told Robert Harrington that Elena was brave and passionate and worth believing in. He'd meant every word, and that, more than anything else about this arrangement, scared him completely. The weekend passed in the careful rhythm Daniel had perfected over 7 years. Saturday morning cartoons with Sophie curled against his side, grocery shopping where she got to pick one special cereal, an afternoon at the park where November cold didn't stop her from conquering the monkey bars. Sunday brought laundry and meal prep, and the comfortable silence of a life lived in small, manageable pieces. He didn't hear from Elena, didn't expect to. The performance was over, the curtain closed. Now she was preparing for Tuesday's board meeting while he returned to being exactly who he'd always been. A single father running a small business, unremarkable except to the one person who mattered. Monday morning brought him back to the workshop with a backlog of orders and the familiar comfort of metal and machinery. He was measuring angles for a custom staircase railing when his phone rang. Unknown number. Daniel almost didn't answer, but something made him put down his measuring tape and swipe to accept. "Mr. Reed," the voice was cultured, cold, and unmistakably Robert Harrington's. "We need to talk. My office. 2:00 today." The line went dead before Daniel could respond. He stood there staring at his phone, a sick feeling spreading through his chest. This wasn't protocol. This wasn't how any of this was supposed to work. The dinner was done. Whatever happened next was between Elena and her board, her father and her company. Daniel's part was finished, except apparently it wasn't. He called Elena immediately. The phone rang 4 times before going to voicemail. He tried again, same result. A 3rd time, and finally she picked up, her voice strained. "Daniel, I can't talk right now. I'm in a meeting with, your father just called me, wants to see me at 2:00 today." Daniel kept his voice level despite the adrenaline starting to spike. "What's going on?" Silence. Then, very quietly, "He knows." The workshop suddenly felt too small. "Knows what?" "Everything. Or enough. I don't know how, I've been careful. We were careful. But he called me Saturday night asking very specific questions about our marriage license, about witnesses, about details we hadn't prepared for." Elena's voice cracked slightly. "He's been investigating. He has people, resources." "Daniel, I'm so sorry. I never thought... What does he want with me?" "I don't know, but whatever he says, whatever he threatens, don't..." She paused, and Daniel heard voices in the background, someone calling her name. "I have to go, please, just be careful." She hung up, and Daniel was left standing in sawdust and morning light, feeling the careful structure of his life beginning to crack. He thought about not going, thought about ignoring Robert's summons, pretending the call never happened, letting whatever storm was coming blow over without him in its path. But he'd learned years ago that avoiding problems didn't make them disappear. It just made them worse. At 1:45, Daniel locked up the workshop and drove downtown. Harrington Industries occupied 15 floors of a building that looked like it was made entirely of glass and ambition. The lobby alone was larger than his apartment, all polished marble and abstract sculptures that probably cost more than his truck. He gave his name to the receptionist, a young woman who looked at him with the kind of professional neutrality that probably hid 1,000 judgments. "Mr. Harrington is expecting you. Top floor, the elevator on the right." The ride up was long enough for Daniel to catalog every way this could go wrong. Robert could threaten to blacklist him from every contract in Chicago, could threaten legal action for fraud or conspiracy, could threaten to expose the fake marriage publicly, humiliating Elena right before the board vote, could threaten Sophie somehow, though Daniel's hands curled into fists at the thought. The elevator opened directly into an executive suite that made Elena's office look modest. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed the city stretching out in every direction. The furniture was the kind that belonged in architecture magazines, and behind a desk the size of Daniel's workbench sat Robert Harrington, looking at him with the expression of a man who held all the cards. "Mr. Reed, punctual. I appreciate that." Robert gestured to a chair across from his desk. "Please, sit." Daniel sat, keeping his spine straight, his expression neutral. Whatever Robert wanted, he wouldn't get the satisfaction of seeing fear. "I assume you know why you're here," Robert said. "I assume you're going to tell me." Robert smiled thinly. "Confidence. Elena said you had that, said you weren't intimidated by wealth or power." He opened a folder on his desk, and Daniel's stomach dropped. Inside were photographs, the exterior of his workshop, his apartment building, Sophie's school. "Interesting research I've conducted over the past few days. You really are exactly what you claim to be. Navy veteran, honorable discharge after 4 years. Opened Reed Fabrication 8 years ago with your discharge savings. Solid reputation, reliable work, modest but steady growth. Full custody of your daughter since her mother abandoned the family when the child was 6 months old." Each word felt like a violation. "You had no right. I had every right to investigate the man my daughter supposedly married." Robert's voice was sharp. "And that investigation revealed something fascinating. No marriage license on file with Cook County, no joint tax returns, no shared property, no combined accounts, nothing that would indicate an actual legal marriage." He closed the folder. "Care to explain that?" Daniel forced himself to breathe slowly. "Whatever arrangement Elena and I have is between us. The arrangement you have is fraud. You attended my family dinner under false pretenses, made claims about your relationship that were demonstrably untrue, and participated in a scheme designed to deceive me and the Harrington Industries Board of Directors." Robert leaned back in his chair. "That's a serious problem, Mr. Reed. What do you want?" "Honesty, for a start." Robert's eyes were cold. "Did my daughter pay you to pretend to be her husband?" Daniel held his gaze. Lying now would only make things worse. "Yes." "How much?" "That's between Elena and me." "How much?" Robert's voice didn't rise, but the threat in it was unmistakable. $50,000, half up front, half after the dinner." Robert actually laughed. "She bought herself a husband for $50,000. I raised her better than to get such poor value." He stood, walking to the window with his hands clasped behind his back. "Here's what's going to happen, Mr. Reed. You're going to contact my daughter and inform her that this arrangement is over. You're going to refuse the second payment, and at tomorrow's board meeting, you're going to attend as a witness to explain exactly what transpired." "No." The word came out harder than Daniel intended. Robert turned slowly. "Excuse me?" "I said no. I'm not testifying against Elena. I'm not helping you take her company." "You don't have a choice. If you refuse, I'll make sure every contractor in this city knows about your little fraud. I'll make sure the licensing board knows. I'll make sure—" He paused, and his smile was cruel. "I'll make sure Sophie's school knows that her father engages in deception for money. I wonder how that will affect custody arrangements." The threat hung in the air like poison. Daniel felt his heart hammering against his ribs, felt the familiar terror of everything he'd built collapsing. But beneath the fear was something harder, anger. At this man who would use a child as leverage, at a system where power meant you could destroy people without consequence, at himself forever thinking this arrangement wouldn't blow back on the one person he was supposed to protect. "You want to destroy my reputation? Go ahead," Daniel said quietly. "You want to drag me through whatever process makes you feel powerful? Do it. But you leave my daughter out of this. She's 7 years old and has nothing to do with any of this. Then cooperate." "I can't do that." "Can't or won't?" "Both." Daniel stood, meeting Robert eye to eye. "Elena hired me to play a role. I played it. That's the extent of my involvement. What happens between you and your daughter isn't my business." "I'm making it your business." Robert moved closer, and Daniel could smell expensive cologne and old money. "You have no idea what you're involved in. My daughter is brilliant, I'll give her that. But she's idealistic to the point of foolishness. She's running Harrington Industries like a charity instead of a business. She's making decisions that will cripple us in 5 years in exchange for feeling morally superior today. Or she's building something sustainable, Daniel said. Something that will last because it's built on more than just profit margins. You've known her for what, a week? And you think you understand her business better than I do? I understand that she's scared of you, that she's willing to hire a stranger to pretend to be her husband rather than face you honestly. That says more about your relationship than any business decision she's made. Robert's jaw tightened. Careful, Mr. Reed. You're already in enough trouble without adding insubordination to the list. I'm not one of your employees. You don't get to threaten me into compliance. Daniel moved toward the door. We're done here. If you walk out that door, I will destroy you. Daniel paused, his hand on the handle. Maybe you will, but I've been destroyed before and rebuilt anyway. I can do it again. He looked back at Robert. Can Elena? If you take her company, if you humiliate her publicly, if you prove that her own father was willing to ruin her rather than let her lead her own way, can she rebuild from that? That's not your concern. You're right. It's not. Daniel opened the door. But it should be yours. He walked out before Robert could respond, maintaining his composure through the lobby and into the parking garage. Only when he was in his truck, doors locked, did he let himself shake. His hands trembled as he gripped the steering wheel. His breath came short and fast. Everything he'd worked for, everything he'd built for Sophie, was about to come crashing down because he'd agreed to one dinner, one performance, one lie that had seemed so simple. His phone rang. Elena. Where are you? Her voice was tight with panic. Parking garage, just left your father's office. Daniel forced himself to breathe normally. He knows everything, has photos of my workshop, my apartment, Sophie's school. He wants me to testify against you tomorrow. No, absolutely not. I won't let him. Elena, stop. Daniel closed his eyes. This is my fault. I should have known it would blow up. Should have known he'd investigate. Should have... This is my fault, Elena interrupted. I brought you into this. I put you and your daughter at risk. I was desperate and selfish, and I didn't think about the consequences. She was crying now, and Daniel realized he'd never heard her cry. I'm going to fix this. I'm going to call my father right now and tell him, don't. The word came out sharp. Don't give him what he wants, not because of me. He's threatening your business, your custody, your entire life. I know what he's threatening. Daniel started the truck, needing movement, needing to feel like he had some control. I need to think, need to figure out how to protect Sophie from the fallout. But Elena, you need to understand something. Whatever I decide, it's not about helping you or helping your father. It's about protecting my daughter. That's the only thing that matters. I understand. Her voice was barely audible. Daniel, I'm so sorry. He hung up without responding because there was nothing to say. Sorry didn't fix this. Sorry didn't protect Sophie from schoolyard questions or custody challenges or the reality that her father had lied for money. Daniel drove aimlessly for 20 minutes before ending up at Sophie's school. Pickup wasn't for another hour, but he parked across the street and watched kids playing on the playground during afternoon recess. He spotted Sophie immediately. She was hanging upside down from the monkey bars, her dark hair swinging, laughing at something her friend Emma had said. She looked happy, safe, unburdened by adult complications. That was what mattered. What? Not Elena's company, not Robert's power plays, not even Daniel's own reputation. Just that little girl on the playground who trusted him to keep her world stable. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. You have until 5 p.m. to decide. Cooperate or face consequences. R.H. Daniel deleted the message and got out of his truck. He crossed the street and stood at the chain-link fence surrounding the playground. Sophie spotted him and waved enthusiastically, then went back to her upside-down conversation. He waved back, trying to memorize this moment. Her joy, her innocence, her complete trust that Daddy would fix whatever needed fixing. What would happen if Robert followed through on his threats? The licensing board would investigate, but Daniel's books were clean. He'd committed fraud in his personal life, but nothing that affected his business operations. The social workers might ask questions about judgment and decision-making, but Sophie was well cared for, thriving. Any investigation would find a devoted father who'd made one stupid mistake, unless Robert manufactured evidence, unless money and power could turn one stupid mistake into something that looked like a pattern. Daniel's phone rang again. Not Elena this time. Marcus Chen, one of his best clients. Daniel, hey, quick question. Did something happen with Harrington Industries? I just got a call from their procurement director asking very specific questions about our working relationship with you. Felt weird. Thought you should know. Daniel's chest tightened. What kind of questions? Reliability, quality of work, how long we've been working together, but also personal stuff. How well I know you, whether you've ever seemed financially desperate, whether I've noticed any ethical concerns. Marcus paused. Man, what's going on? I can't explain right now, but Marcus, if they ask you anything else, just tell the truth. My work speaks for itself. It does, Marcus agreed. But Daniel, these people sounded serious, like they were building a case for something. You in some kind of trouble? I might be, Daniel admitted. I'll handle it. Thanks for the heads up. He hung up and immediately called his other major clients. Same story. Robert's people had contacted them all, asking questions designed to build a narrative of unreliability or ethical compromise. Daniel could see the strategy clearly. Robert wasn't just threatening, he was already executing, already poisoning the well. By the time Daniel picked up Sophie, his phone had logged 8 calls from various clients and vendors, all reporting similar contacts. The message was clear: cooperate or watch your business crumble in real time. Sophie chattered about her day. They dissected owl pellets in science class and found tiny mouse bones, which she thought was the coolest thing ever, while Daniel's mind spun through scenarios. He could cooperate with Robert, testify about the fake marriage, help destroy Elena's credibility. That would stop the attacks on his business, but would mean living with the knowledge that he'd let a good woman be destroyed by her father's manipulation. Or he could refuse, protect Elena, and watch everything he'd built for Sophie slowly disintegrate as Robert used his resources to strangle Reed Fabrication out of existence. There was no good choice, just different versions of losing. That night, after Sophie was asleep, Daniel sat at his kitchen table with a beer he wasn't drinking and a decision he couldn't make. His laptop showed his bank balance. The $25,000 from Elena had already been earmarked for equipment repairs, and Sophie's college fund. The second $25,000 would have meant breathing room for the first time in years. But Robert was right about one thing. Elena had gotten poor value. $50,000 to buy a performance that had collapsed within days. $50,000 that was now going to cost Daniel everything. His phone lit up with a call. Elena, again. He let it go to voicemail. She called back immediately. On the third attempt, he finally answered. What? I'm ending all contracts between Harrington Industries and Reed Fabrication. Elena's voice was hollow, exhausted. Effective immediately. I'm sending the paperwork tonight. Daniel sat up straight. What are you talking about? It's the only way to protect you. My father's using our professional relationship as leverage, claiming you're financially dependent on contracts my company provides, that you're biased, that your testimony can't be trusted. If we sever all business ties, he loses that weapon. Elena, those contracts are 30% of my revenue. I can't just... I know what I'm asking, but it's better than what my father will do if you don't cooperate with him. She paused, and he heard her breathing, trying to stay calm. I'm also transferring the full $50,000 tonight. Both payments. Consider it severance for the contracts I'm ending. I don't want your money. It's not about what you want. It's about protecting your business, your reputation, your daughter. If my father can prove you were financially dependent on me, he'll use it to destroy your credibility and your client relationships. Her voice hardened with resolve. This way, you can tell him honestly that you have no business relationship with me or my company. You attended one dinner as a favor to a former client, that's all. No ongoing arrangement, no financial incentive to lie, nothing he can use. Daniel processed this. She was cutting the cord completely, removing herself as a vulnerability in his life. It was strategic and cold, and probably the smartest move available. It also meant she was giving up the one person who might have stood with her tomorrow. What about you? He asked. What happens at the board meeting? I fight with the truth. I tell them I hired someone to attend a family dinner because my father's narrative about my personal life was affecting my professional credibility. I explained that it was a stupid, desperate decision made by someone who was out of options. She laughed bitterly. I'll probably lose anyway, but at least I'll lose honestly. Elena. Thank you, Daniel, for trying, for being kind when you could have walked away, for seeing me as more than just a desperate CEO throwing money at problems. Her voice cracked. And I'm sorry for all of this. You and Sophie deserve better. She hung up before he could respond. Daniel sat in the silence of his kitchen, understanding what she'd done. She'd sacrificed her best defense, his potential testimony about her character, about the dinner, about her father's manipulation, to protect him from Robert's retaliation. She'd chosen his safety over her own survival. It was the kind of decision a good person made, the kind of decision that meant she'd lose everything tomorrow. His email pinged. The contract termination paperwork, exactly as Elena had promised. Professional and thorough and completely severing Reed Fabrication from Harrington Industries. Attached was a wire transfer confirmation for $50,000. The full payment, both halves, with a memo that read final settlement for terminated contracts. Another email arrived. This one from Robert Harrington's office. Mr. Reed, given the termination of your business relationship with Harrington Industries, your testimony tomorrow is no longer required. Consider this matter closed. R.H. Daniel stared at the screen. Elena had outmaneuvered her father, had removed Daniel from the battlefield entirely by cutting all ties between them. Robert couldn't threaten his business anymore because there was no business relationship to threaten. Couldn't claim financial bias because the $50,000 was documented as contract settlement, not payment for testimony. She'd protected him completely and isolated herself in the process. Daniel checked the time. 11:47 p.m. The board meeting was in less than 12 hours. Elena would walk in alone, admit to the fake marriage, and face her father's wrath without any allies. She'd lose her company, lose her position, lose everything she'd built because she'd been desperate enough to hire a stranger and honest enough to protect him when it fell apart. He thought about Sophie, asleep in her room. Thought about the $50,000 now sitting in his account. Thought about the safety Elena had bought him at the cost of her own. Then he thought about the look in her eyes when she'd walked into his workshop that first night. The fear and determination. The woman who'd built something worth protecting and was willing to do whatever it took to keep it. She deserved better than losing because she'd chosen to protect someone else. Daniel opened his laptop and started typing. At 7 a.m. Tuesday morning, Daniel was waiting in the lobby of Harrington Industries. He wore the same navy suit from the dinner, his hair combed, his jaw tight with determination. When Elena stepped off the elevator at 7:30, clearly heading to prepare for the 9 o'clock board meeting, she stopped dead. Daniel? What are you? You can't be here. My father will... Your father already released me from any obligation to testify. Check your email. He sent the same message to me last night. Daniel stood, meeting her eyes. Which means I'm here as a private citizen who has some things to say to your board of directors. Elena's face went pale. No, absolutely not. I ended the contracts to protect you. If you show up now, he'll find a way to use it against both of us. Maybe. But I'm betting he won't expect me to tell the complete truth. Daniel handed her a folder. I wrote everything down, the whole story. How you hired me, why you hired me, what your father threatened when he found out, every detail. This will destroy any credibility I have left. Or it will show a board of directors that their CEO was desperate enough to hire a stranger because her own father was trying to take her company. Daniel's voice was steady. Sometimes the truth is the best weapon, even when it's ugly. Elena read through his pages, her hands shaking slightly. When she finished, she looked up at him with something like wonder. You wrote about his threats? About the investigation? About him contacting your clients? All of it. Let the board decide who's acting in the company's best interest, the CEO who made one desperate mistake, or the founder who's willing to destroy people to maintain control. He'll retaliate against you, against your business, against... Let him try. Daniel smiled grimly. I've got $50,000 in the bank thanks to you. That's enough to survive on for a year if I need to. And I've got documentation of every conversation, every threat, every contact he made with my clients. If he wants a war, I'm ready. Elena stared at him. Why are you doing this? You're safe. You could walk away. Because you protected me when you didn't have to, Daniel said simply. Because you chose my daughter's safety over your own advantage. Because watching you lose to your father's manipulation would mean he was right, that decency is weakness, and I don't believe that. For a long moment, Elena didn't speak. Then she stepped forward and hugged him, brief and tight, before stepping back. Okay, let's do this. They rode the elevator to the top floor together, neither speaking, both understanding that the next hours would determine everything. The boardroom was already filling with directors. 11 men and women in expensive suits, reviewing documents, drinking coffee, preparing for what they thought would be a straightforward meeting about leadership transition. Robert was already seated at the head of the table. When he saw Daniel walk in behind Elena, his expression shifted from confidence to shock to cold fury. Mr. Reed, you're not authorized to be here. I invited him, Elena said firmly, taking her seat, as a witness to provide context on recent events. The board doesn't need context from hired help, Robert said, but several directors were looking at Daniel with interest. The board chair, a woman in her 60s named Catherine Morrison, held up a hand. Let's hear what he has to say. If it's relevant, we'll consider it. If not, we'll ask him to leave. Daniel remained standing, aware of every eye on him. My name is Daniel Reed. I own a small metal fabrication shop here in Chicago. 3 weeks ago, Elena Harrington hired me to attend a family dinner and pretend to be her husband. She paid me $50,000 for this service. The room erupted, directors talking over each other, Robert's face going dark with satisfaction, Elena sitting perfectly still with her hands folded on the table. Catherine banged her gavel. Let him finish. Daniel continued. She hired me because her father had been building a narrative that she was too unstable and unmarriageable to lead this company effectively. She was desperate to prove him wrong before this meeting, so she hired me to play a role. He paused. It was deceptive. It was foolish. And it was also the act of someone who cared so much about this company that she was willing to do something stupid to protect it. This is absurd, Robert interrupted. He's been paid to say this. He has no credibility. Actually, I have documentation. Daniel pulled out his folder. These are the contracts Elena terminated last night, severing all business relationships between her company and mine. These are emails from your office, Mr. Harrington, threatening to destroy my business and my custody of my daughter if I didn't cooperate with you. These are records of calls your people made to my clients, attempting to undermine my reputation before I'd even decided what to do. He laid it all on the table, page after page of evidence. Elena made a mistake, but when her father discovered it, he didn't address it as a father or even as a board member. He weaponized it, threatened a single parent with losing his child, actively worked to destroy a small business owner who'd done nothing except accept a job offer. The room had gone quiet. Catherine was reading through the documents, her expression growing more concerned with each page. Robert stood. This is a setup. He's lying to protect his meal ticket. I don't have a meal ticket anymore, Daniel said calmly. Elena ended our business relationship specifically so I couldn't be accused of bias. The $50,000 she paid me is documented as settlement for those terminated contracts. I have no financial incentive to be here. I came because I thought you should know the complete truth before making your decision. And what truth is that? Catherine asked. Daniel looked directly at her. That Elena Harrington cares more about this company than her own reputation. She was willing to admit her mistake publicly rather than let me be destroyed for it. She chose protecting a stranger over protecting herself. That's not weakness. That's integrity. He turned to Robert. Your daughter built something remarkable here. She's running this company with values you taught her: quality, commitment, responsibility. She's just applying them differently than you did. And instead of being proud, you're trying to tear it all down because you can't control it anymore. Robert's voice was ice. You have no idea what you're talking about. Maybe not. I'm just a metal worker who makes brackets and railings. But I know something about building things that last. And I know the difference between strength and control. Daniel collected his papers. That's all I came to say. What you do with it is up to you. He walked out before anyone could stop him, his heart pounding, his hands shaking with adrenaline. He'd just burned every bridge, exposed every vulnerability, thrown himself completely into a battle that wasn't even his to fight. But Elena's expression as he left, shock and gratitude and something that looked like hope, made it worth it. Now he just had to wait and see if the truth was enough. Daniel made it to the elevator before his legs started shaking. He jabbed the button for the ground floor and leaned against the wall, breathing hard, replaying every word he'd just said in front of 11 strangers and one powerful man who now had every reason to destroy him. The elevator descended in silence, numbers counting down like a timer on a bomb. When the doors opened to the lobby, Daniel walked out into morning sunlight that felt too bright, too normal for what had just happened. His truck was in the parking garage 3 blocks away. He started walking, needing movement, needing to process what he'd done. His phone buzzed. Mrs. Rodriguez. Sophie forgot her lunch. I can bring it to school if you're working? Reality crashed back. Sophie, school, the actual life that existed outside boardrooms and corporate warfare. Daniel checked his watch, 8:47. He had time to get the lunch, drop it at school, and still make it to the workshop by 10. He texted back, I'll handle it. Thanks. The drive home, the retrieval of Sophie's forgotten lunchbox with the cartoon dinosaurs on it, the familiar route to her school, all of it felt surreal. Like he was operating in 2 worlds simultaneously. In one world, he was Daniel Reed, single dad handling the small logistics of raising a child. In the other, he just stood in front of corporate executives and exposed Robert Harrington's manipulation for what it was. Those 2 worlds couldn't coexist. One of them would collapse, and he had no idea which. He dropped the lunch at the school office with a smile for the secretary who knew him by name, drove to the workshop, unlocked the door, stood in the familiar space surrounded by tools and metal and half-finished projects. Everything looked the same as yesterday, but Daniel felt fundamentally different, like he'd crossed some invisible line and couldn't find his way back. His phone rang at 10:30. Unknown number. Daniel stared at it for 3 rings before answering. Reed. The voice was Catherine Morrison's, crisp and professional. This is Catherine Morrison, board chair for Harrington Industries. Do you have a moment? Daniel's heart stopped. Yes, ma'am. The board has completed its preliminary discussions. We'd like to meet with you again if you're available. This afternoon, 2 o'clock. I already said everything I came to say. Nevertheless, we have questions. Your testimony raised significant concerns that require clarification. Her tone gave nothing away. Will you be available? Daniel thought about saying no, thought about drawing a line, protecting himself, going back to the simple life where board meetings and corporate politics were someone else's problem. But he'd already jumped into this fight with both feet. Retreating now wouldn't undo the damage or protect him from Robert's inevitable retaliation. I'll be there, he said. Good. Second conference room, not the boardroom. Come to the 14th floor reception and someone will escort you. She paused. Mr. Reed, what you did this morning was either very brave or very foolish. We're still determining which. She hung up before he could respond. Daniel spent the next 3 hours trying to work and failing. He measured the same piece of steel 4 times, got 4 different numbers, and finally gave up. His mind wouldn't focus, kept replaying the board meeting, Robert's fury, Elena's face, kept wondering what questions they wanted to ask and whether he'd made everything worse by showing up. At 1:30, he closed the workshop early, changed into the suit again, this time in the workshop bathroom because going home felt like admitting he was nervous. Drove downtown through lunch traffic, parked in the same garage, took deep breaths that didn't quite reach his lungs. The 14th floor was quieter than the executive suite. Professional, but less intimidating. The receptionist was expecting him, led him down a hallway to a conference room where Catherine Morrison sat alone at a table with a recording device and a legal pad covered in notes. Mr. Reed, thank you for coming. She gestured to a chair across from her. This is an informal conversation, but I'm recording it for accuracy. Do you consent to that? Yes. Catherine started the recorder, stated the date and time, identified both of them. Then she looked at Daniel with eyes that had probably seen every kind of corporate manipulation imaginable. Let's start with the simple question. Why did you really come to the board meeting this morning? I told you, Elena protected me when she didn't have to. I wanted to return the favor. By admitting to fraud, by exposing yourself to potential legal consequences, by making an enemy of one of the most powerful men in Chicago. Catherine's expression was skeptical. Forgive me, but that seems like an extreme response to someone simply ending business contracts. Daniel considered his words carefully. Elena could have thrown me to the wolves, could have let her father destroy my business and my reputation to save herself. Instead, she cut all ties between us so I'd be safe. That told me something about her character. What did it tell you? That she values people over power, that she'll sacrifice her own advantage to protect someone else. That's not common in my experience. Daniel met Catherine's eyes. And it's definitely not the behavior of someone who's too unstable to lead a company. Catherine made a note. Tell me about Robert Harrington's threats, specifically the ones regarding your daughter. Daniel's jaw tightened. He said he'd make sure Sophie's school knew I'd engaged in fraud for money, implied it could affect custody arrangements, used a 7-year-old child as leverage to force my cooperation. Did you record these conversations? No, but I have the emails from his office, the documented contacts with my clients, the timeline of events. Daniel pulled out his phone, showing the messages. And I have witnesses. Every client he contacted can verify what his people asked them. Catherine photographed the messages with her own phone, added more notes. What was your impression of the dinner at the Harrington estate? The family dynamic? Daniel thought back to that night. Robert interrogated me like I was a hostile witness, tried to make Elena feel small for her choices. There was a moment in his study where he talked about building the company for Elena, but it felt more like he'd built it as something he could hold over her, like his love came with conditions she could never quite meet. Did Elena seem afraid of him? Yes, not physically, but afraid of his judgment, his disapproval, his ability to take away what she'd built. Daniel leaned forward. Look, I don't know Robert Harrington outside of 2 interactions. Maybe he's a great man who built an incredible company. But what I saw was a father weaponizing his daughter's vulnerabilities instead of supporting her leadership. Catherine was quiet for a moment, studying him. You're very protective of someone you barely know. I recognize the situation, Daniel said simply. I know what it's like when powerful people try to use your weaknesses against you, when they think your background or your circumstances make you easy to control. He thought of Rachel's family, their lawyers, the custody battle that never quite materialized because Daniel had refused to be intimidated. Elena's fighting the same battle, just with higher stakes. And you have no ulterior motive? No expectation of future business relationships or financial gain? None. After today, I'll probably never see Elena Harrington again. Her father will make sure I never work with any company he has influence over. Best case scenario, I've made my business life significantly harder for the foreseeable future. Daniel smiled without humor. Worst case, I've painted a target on my back that Robert will aim at for years. Then why do it? Daniel thought about Sophie on the playground, hanging upside down, laughing. Thought about the world he was trying to model for her. Because sometimes you have to stand up when you see something wrong, even if it costs you. Because I want my daughter to learn that integrity matters more than safety. And because Elena deserved to have at least one person in that room who was willing to tell the truth about what happened, consequences be damned. Catherine set down her pen. That's either admirably principled or dangerously naive. Probably both, Daniel admitted. She smiled slightly, the first warmth he'd seen from her. The board is still deliberating. We've asked Robert to provide documentation of his claims about Elena's leadership decisions. We've also asked Elena to provide her strategic plans and financial projections for the next 5 years. She paused. Your testimony complicated things significantly. In what way? You've raised questions about Robert's motivations and methods, made us wonder if this leadership challenge is really about the company's best interests or about personal control. Catherine shut off the recorder. Off the record, what Robert did to you, threatening a child, attempting to destroy your business, that's not the behavior of someone acting in good faith. Are you going to tell him I said that? I'm going to tell him the board has concerns about his approach. What happens from there depends on what Elena presents and what Robert can prove. She stood, and Daniel did the same. Thank you for your honesty, Mr. Reed. Whatever happens, you've given us important context. Daniel left the building with no more clarity than he'd entered with. The board could still side with Robert, could decide Elena's deception was disqualifying regardless of the circumstances, could determine that a CEO who'd hire a fake husband showed poor judgment that extended to business decisions. Or they could see what Daniel saw, a woman fighting to protect something she'd built from a man who couldn't accept that she'd surpassed him. He picked up Sophie from school at 3:15, listening to her excited story about the tadpoles in their classroom tank. She'd named hers Jumper, and was convinced it would be the first to grow legs. Daniel made appropriate sounds of interest while his mind spun through scenarios, contingencies, possibilities. "Daddy, you're not listening." Sophie's voice cut through his thoughts. "I am, sweetheart. Jumper the tadpole, first to get legs." "You said that already." She looked at him with 7-year-old perception that was sometimes too accurate. "Are you worried about work?" "A little bit," Daniel admitted. No point lying. Sophie could read him better than anyone. "Is it bad? Like when the big machine broke?" "Different kind of bad, but I'm handling it." He squeezed her hand. "Nothing for you to worry about." They stopped at the grocery store, and Sophie convinced him they needed ingredients for chocolate chip cookies. It was a Wednesday, not a baking night, but Daniel found himself agreeing because he needed something normal and concrete. Needed to measure flour and sugar and watch his daughter carefully crack eggs. Needed to remember what he was actually fighting for. They were pulling the first batch from the oven when his phone rang. Elena. Daniel almost didn't answer with Sophie right there, but she was already reaching for a cookie, distracted by warm chocolate, so he stepped into the living room. "How bad is it?" he asked without preamble. "I don't know yet. The board's still in session. They've been questioning my father for the past 2 hours. Elena's voice was strained. "Daniel, what you did this morning. Don't thank me yet. It might have made things worse." "It didn't. Catherine Morrison told me they're seriously reconsidering my father's claims. They want documentation I've been preparing for months, but he never asked to see." She paused. "They also want him to explain the threats against you. Apparently, corporate board members don't love the optics of powerful executives threatening single fathers." "Good," Daniel said. Then, "Are you okay?" The question seemed to surprise her. "I don't know. I feel like I'm standing on a cliff edge waiting to see which way I'll fall. My whole professional life is being judged by 11 people who've probably already made up their minds." She laughed shakily. "But I'm still standing. That's something." "It's everything," Daniel said. "Whatever happens tomorrow, you fought for what you built. You didn't let him take it without a fight." "Tomorrow?" Elena's confusion was clear. "Daniel, the vote is happening tonight. They're deliberating now. I should know in a few hours." Tonight. The word hit Daniel like a physical blow. He'd thought he had time to prepare, to ready himself for whatever fallout was coming. But it was happening right now. While he was baking cookies with his daughter, Elena's entire future was being decided. "Do you want me there?" The offer came out before he'd thought it through. "No, this is mine to face, but thank you." Elena's voice softened. "Daniel, regardless of how this ends, thank you for seeing me. Not the CEO, not the Harrington heir, just Elena. That's rarer than you know." She hung up, and Daniel stood in his living room holding his phone, feeling the weight of the moment. Somewhere downtown, in a boardroom he'd stood in that morning, 11 people were deciding Elena's fate, and by extension, deciding whether Daniel's testimony had helped or destroyed her. "Daddy, the cookies are ready," Sophie's voice called from the kitchen. Daniel put his phone away and went to eat cookies with his daughter. Because whatever happened in that boardroom, Sophie still needed dinner and homework help and bedtime stories. The world kept turning regardless of corporate power struggles. They ate grilled cheese sandwiches for dinner, worked on Sophie's math homework, addition problems that she solved with careful concentration. Read 3 chapters of the Magical Tree book, even though it was a school night and they usually only read 2. Daniel let her stay up an extra 30 minutes because he needed her cheerful presence, needed to remember what uncomplicated love looked like. At 9:15, after Sophie was asleep, Daniel's phone lit up with a call. "Elena, again." He answered immediately. "What happened?" "I won." Her voice was thick with emotion. "The vote was 8-3 in my favor. My father lost." Daniel felt something unclench in his chest. Elena, he's being removed from the board entirely, effective immediately. The board cited your testimony about his threats and manipulation, said they couldn't trust his judgment if he was willing to use those tactics against a non-employee. She was crying now, openly. He built that company, and they just removed him because of what I did, because I hired you, because this whole mess happened. He was removed because of what he did, Daniel corrected firmly. The threats, the investigation, the attempts to destroy my business, that was his choice. You didn't make him do any of that. I know. But Daniel, you should have seen his face. She trailed off. He looked broken. Daniel understood the complicated grief in her voice. Robert had tried to destroy her, but he was still her father. Still the man who'd raised her, who'd built something he'd intended for her, who'd loved her in his own controlling way. What happens now? Daniel asked. I rebuild. I prove the board made the right choice. I run this company the way it should be run. Elena's voice steadied. And I deal with the fact that my father and I might never speak again. Give him time. Sometimes people surprise you. I hope you're right. She was quiet for a moment. Daniel, the board wants to issue a public statement about the leadership change. Nothing about the fake marriage, that stays internal. But they want to acknowledge that there was a challenge and that it was resolved in favor of current leadership. Okay. Which means reporters might start asking questions, might start digging into relationships, looking for the story behind the story. Elena's concern was clear. I can probably keep your name out of it, but do what you need to do, Daniel said. I knew the risks when I showed up this morning. You shouldn't have to deal with that, with any of this. Too late. We're both in it now. Daniel walked to his window, looking out at the street below. But Elena, we need to set some boundaries, clear ones. Whatever happens with the press, whatever your company does next, my involvement ends here. I can't keep getting pulled into your world. Sophie needs stability, and this... He gestured at nothing, at everything. This isn't stable. I understand. Elena's voice was small. Thank you, Daniel, for everything. I'll make sure the final payment is processed immediately, and I don't want the rest of the money. Silence. Then, what? Keep it. Use it for the company. Use it for charity. Use it for whatever you want. But I don't want payment for what I did today. Daniel's voice was firm. I didn't testify for money. I testified because it was right. Taking payment now would make it feel like I was bought. Daniel, we had an agreement. You earned that money. We had an agreement based on one dinner. Everything that came after, the board meeting, the testimony, all of it, that was my choice. Not part of the contract. He smiled slightly. Besides, I've got $25,000 I didn't have 3 weeks ago. That's more than enough. Elena was quiet for a long moment. You're a better man than most people I know. I'm a father trying to model integrity for his kid. That's all. That's everything, Elena said, echoing his earlier words back to him. Take care of yourself, Daniel Reed, and that daughter of yours. You too, Elena Harrington, and congratulations. You earned this. He hung up, feeling the finality of it. Whatever connection had formed between them over the past weeks, forged in desperation and crisis and unexpected honesty, it was ending now, had to end now. They existed in different worlds, and this brief collision had already caused enough damage. Daniel checked on Sophie one more time before bed. She was sprawled across her mattress in the position she always slept in, arms flung wide like she was hugging the whole world. He stood in her doorway, thinking about the choices he'd made, the risks he'd taken, the bridges he'd burned. If Robert Harrington followed through on his threats, Daniel's business could still suffer. Clients could still back away, concerned about association with controversy. The licensing board could still investigate. His quiet life could still be upended. But looking at his sleeping daughter, Daniel knew he'd make the same choices again. Because she was learning from everything he did, even when she didn't know she was learning. And he wanted her to understand that sometimes you stood up for people, even when it was dangerous. Sometimes you told the truth, even when it was costly. Sometimes integrity mattered more than safety. Those were lessons worth any price. The next morning brought rain and a handful of emails from clients asking careful questions about his involvement with Harrington Industries. Daniel responded honestly. He'd attended a personal dinner, provided testimony to the board, had no ongoing business relationship with the company. Most seemed satisfied. 2 contracts were quietly withdrawn. One new client specifically reached out because they'd heard about his testimony and respected his principles. The net result was roughly neutral. Not the disaster Robert had threatened, but not business as usual either. By Friday, the story had hit the business press. Not the full story. Nobody mentioned the fake marriage or the dinner at Lake Forest. Just that Robert Harrington had been removed from the board of his own company following a leadership dispute with his daughter. Elena's name appeared frequently, always with phrases like forward-thinking and sustainable practices and next-generation leadership. Robert's name appeared too, but with terms like old guard and traditional approach, and refused to comment. Daniel read the articles with a mixture of relief and unease. Elena had won. Robert had lost. But the human cost of that victory was scattered across every paragraph. A father-daughter relationship destroyed, a legacy complicated, a family broken by competing visions of what success should look like. On Saturday morning, Daniel was in the workshop finishing the custom staircase railing when someone knocked on the side door. He opened it, expecting a delivery, and found Robert Harrington standing in the cold drizzle. For a moment, neither man spoke. Robert looked older than he had at the board meeting, tired, the kind of exhaustion that came from losing something you'd defined yourself by. "Mr. Harrington." Daniel didn't move from the doorway. "If you're here to threaten me again." "I'm not." Robert's voice was rough. "May I come in?" "Just for a moment." Daniel considered refusing, considered closing the door and calling, "Who? Elena? The police?" But curiosity won out. He stepped back, letting Robert into the workshop. The older man looked around at the equipment, the projects, the organized chaos of a working fabrication shop. "You really do make quality work," he said, examining the half-finished railing. "I can see why contractors like you." "What do you want, Mr. Harrington?" Robert turned to face him. "To understand why you did it. Why you threw yourself into the fire for my daughter. You barely knew her, had no obligation beyond a simple financial transaction. Yet you showed up to that board meeting and handed them everything they needed to remove me." Daniel crossed his arms. "You handed them what they needed when you threatened a single father to force cooperation. I just made sure they knew about it." "Fair enough." Robert moved to the workbench, running his hand along the smooth steel. "I built that company from nothing. 3 hardware stores. My father thought I was insane to expand, but I saw potential. Spent 30 years turning potential into reality. Harrington Industries was my legacy. It still is. Elena's running it with the values you taught her." "She's running it like a charity." Robert's voice hardened. "Sustainable materials, fair wages, environmental initiatives, these things sound noble, but they're expensive. They cut margins. They make us vulnerable to competitors who aren't burdened by conscience." "Or they make you stronger," Daniel said. "More resilient, more respected. Elena's not being sentimental. She's being strategic." "You sound like her." Robert's laugh was bitter. "Same arguments, same idealism, same certainty that doing the right thing will somehow result in business success. Hasn't it? From what I've read, the company's more profitable under Elena's leadership than it ever was under yours." The words hung between them. Robert's jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. "She's brilliant," he said finally. "Always has been. Smarter than me in most ways. But she's my daughter. I built that company for her. And watching her change everything I created." He trailed off. "It felt like watching my life's work be dismantled." "It felt like losing control," Daniel corrected. "There's a difference." Robert looked at him sharply. "You're very perceptive for a metal worker." "I'm very familiar with fear disguised as authority," Daniel said. "My ex-wife's family tried the same thing when she left. Threatened to take Sophie to prove I was an unfit parent, to use their money and connections to control the situation. I learned fast that powerful people who feel threatened will use whatever weapons they can reach. And yet here you are. Still have your daughter. Because I refused to be intimidated. Because I documented everything and prepared for battle and made it clear I wouldn't surrender without a fight." Daniel met Robert's eyes. "Sound familiar?" Robert was quiet for a long moment. "I underestimated you." "You underestimated Elena. I was just collateral damage." Perhaps. Robert moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, I didn't actually contact child services about your daughter. That was a bluff to force cooperation. But you were willing to make the threat, willing to use a child as leverage. That tells me everything I need to know about your priorities. Robert's face darkened. I was fighting for my company. You were fighting for control, Daniel said, and you were willing to destroy anyone who got in your way, including your own daughter. That's not love, Mr. Harrington. That's possession. The words hit their mark. Robert's composure cracked, and for a moment Daniel saw raw pain in his eyes. She's all I have left. Her mother died. The company was supposed to be something we shared, something that connected us. Then let it connect you, Daniel said more gently. Support her leadership instead of undermining it. Be her father instead of her adversary. It's not too late. She won't speak to me. Had her assistant inform me that all future communication should go through the board. Robert's voice was hollow. I've lost her. You lost her the moment you tried to take her company. But you could get her back if you're willing to actually change, to trust her, to let go. Robert looked at him for a long moment. You really believe that? I believe people can surprise you. I believe relationships can heal if both people want them to. Daniel thought of his own father, absent since before Sophie was born. But it requires humility. It requires admitting you were wrong and meaning it. I wasn't wrong about everything. Neither was she. That's where compromise starts. Robert nodded slowly, seeming to age in front of Daniel. Thank you, Mr. Reed, for your honesty, if nothing else. He left without another word, and Daniel watched through the window as the older man climbed into his car and drove away. He felt an unexpected pang of sympathy. Robert Harrington had lost something that defined him, had watched his daughter surpass him, and hadn't known how to handle that success with grace. Daniel understood that kind of loss, understood how fear could masquerade as strength, how love could twist into control, how the need to protect could become the thing that destroyed. He just hoped Robert would figure out what Daniel had learned through hard experience, that the only thing worth protecting was the relationship itself. Everything else, the company, the legacy, the power, was just scaffolding, beautiful and important maybe, but not worth sacrificing the people you loved. The workshop phone rang, pulling Daniel from his thoughts. A new client, asking about custom fireplace screens for a renovation project. Daniel took notes, quoted a price, scheduled a consultation. Normal work, normal life. The kind of steady, unglamorous existence he'd built for Sophie and himself. It felt good to be back in it. That evening, Daniel took Sophie to their favorite pizza place, the one with the arcade games and the pizza that was objectively mediocre, but Sophie loved anyway. She beat him at skee-ball 3 times in a row and collected enough tickets for a plastic ring that would probably break within a week. This was a good day, Sophie announced as they walked to the truck, her new ring catching streetlight. Yeah, Daniel agreed, lifting her up so she could reach the door handle herself. Yeah, it was. His phone buzzed as they drove home, a text from an unknown number. The board issued their formal statement this afternoon. Thought you should know. Thank you again for everything. Daniel didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. Elena had her company, Robert had his defeat, and Daniel had what he'd always had, a daughter, a business, and the quiet satisfaction of having done the right thing even when it was hard. That was enough. More than enough. It was everything. 3 months passed like water through fingers. Fast enough that Daniel barely noticed the seasons changing. Slow enough that each day felt complete in itself. Winter deepened into the kind of Chicago cold that made metal sting against bare skin, and Daniel's workshop became a refuge of warmth and purpose. The controversy around Harrington Industries faded from the business pages, replaced by newer scandals and fresher conflicts. Elena's name appeared occasionally in articles about sustainable manufacturing or corporate innovation, always with the phrase CEO Elena Harrington, and never with any mention of fake marriages or family drama. Daniel didn't follow the coverage closely. He was too busy with the steady stream of work that had somehow increased after the board meeting. Apparently testifying against a powerful executive earned you a certain reputation. Some clients backed away, nervous about controversy, but others sought him out specifically. They wanted someone who couldn't be bought or intimidated. someone whose word meant something. Reed Fabrication's bank account grew steadily, not dramatically, but enough that Daniel could finally repair the CNC machine properly instead of nursing it along with improvised fixes. Enough that Sophie's college fund grew past $30,000. Enough that when she asked if they could go to the aquarium for her birthday, he could say yes without calculating whether it would impact next month's rent. Sophie turned 8 on a Saturday in late January with a small party at their apartment, 6 kids from school, pizza that was actually good this time, and a cake shaped like a sea turtle because she'd decided veterinarians should specialize, and she was specializing in marine animals. She wore a party hat made of glittery paper and laughed so hard at her friend Emma's jokes that juice came out her nose. Daniel took pictures and cleaned up spills and felt the particular contentment that came from watching your child be completely, unselfconsciously happy. Mrs. Rodriguez stopped by after the other parents picked up their kids, bringing a gift wrapped in paper covered with dolphins. 8 years old, she said, hugging Sophie. I remember when your daddy brought you home from the hospital, so tiny. Now look at you, all grown up. I'm not grown up yet, Sophie protested, but she was grinning. I have to be at least 10 before I'm grown up. At least 10, Mrs. Rodriguez agreed seriously. Then to Daniel, you've done good, mijo. She's a beautiful girl, inside and out. After Sophie was asleep that night, surrounded by new books about ocean animals and a stuffed narwhal she'd named Dr. Tusk, Daniel sat in his kitchen with the kind of tired satisfaction that came from successful fatherhood. 8 years. He'd kept her safe and happy and loved for 8 years. Had figured out how to braid hair and handle playground politics and explain why some kids had 2 parents and she only had 1. Had built a life that was small and stable and completely theirs. His phone buzzed with a text. For a moment, his heart jumped, expecting Elena's name. But it was just Marcus Chen. Great work on the Riverside railings. Client wants to know if you're available for their next property. Interested? Daniel typed back, always, send details Monday. He scrolled through his messages out of habit, past client discussions and school notifications, and Mrs. Rodriguez's occasional texts about neighborhood news. There was nothing from Elena. Hadn't been anything since that final text 3 months ago. They'd agreed. Clean break, separate lives, no ongoing connection. It was the smart choice, the safe choice. It was also the choice that left a strange, hollow feeling in his chest when he thought about it too long. Daniel shook off the thought and went to bed. He had work Monday, a consultation Tuesday, Sophie's parent-teacher conference Wednesday. His life was full and meaningful and exactly what he'd built it to be. Whatever brief connection he'd felt with Elena Harrington, that recognition of someone else fighting their own battles with courage and integrity, it belonged to a moment that was over. Monday morning brought a surprise. Daniel arrived at the workshop to find a black sedan parked in his lot. Not a Mercedes this time. Something more modest, but still expensive. He approached cautiously, and the driver's window rolled down to reveal a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and professional attire. Mr. Reed, I'm Jennifer Park. I'm the new External Relations Director for Harrington Industries. She held up a business card. I was hoping we could talk for a few minutes. At your convenience, of course. Daniel's guard went up immediately. I don't have any business relationship with Harrington Industries. I know. This isn't about business. May I come in? I promise I'm not here to cause problems. Actually, I'm here to solve one. Against his better judgment, Daniel unlocked the workshop and let her in. Jennifer looked around with apparent interest, pausing at the half-finished decorative gate he was fabricating for a private residence. This is beautiful work. The detail is exceptional. Thank you. What problem are you here to solve, Miss Park? Jennifer set her briefcase on his workbench and pulled out a folder. 3 months ago, you terminated all contracts with Harrington Industries. Those contracts represented approximately 30% of your annual revenue. You also provided testimony to our board that was instrumental in a significant leadership change. And you refused the second half of a agreed-upon payment. She looked at him directly. Ms. Harrington has been trying to figure out how to properly compensate you for your assistance without making you uncomfortable. I'm here as a neutral third party to facilitate that conversation. I don't want compensation. I made that clear. I understand. But consider it from Ms. Harrington's perspective. You sacrificed business relationships and took substantial personal risk to help her. She feels she owes you something beyond gratitude. Jennifer opened the folder. So she's proposing something different, not payment for past services, but an opportunity for future partnership. Daniel crossed his arms. I'm not interested in being a vendor for Harrington Industries again. That door closed for good reasons. Not a vendor, a partner. Jennifer pulled out architectural renderings. Harrington Industries is launching a new division focused on sustainable urban development. We're planning 3 mixed-use buildings in underserved Chicago neighborhoods over the next 5 years. Each project will require extensive custom metalwork, railings, fixtures, decorative elements, structural components. Ms. Harrington wants to offer you the contract for all 3 projects. The renderings were impressive, modern buildings designed to fit their neighborhoods rather than dominate them. Green spaces, community areas, affordable housing mixed with commercial development. Exactly the kind of work Daniel had always wanted to do, but never had the capital or connections to access. What's the catch? He asked. No catch. Well, one condition. You'd need to expand your operation, hire employees, acquire additional equipment, possibly move to a larger facility. These projects are beyond what a one-man shop can handle. Jennifer smiled slightly. Ms. Harrington is prepared to provide a low-interest loan to facilitate that expansion. You'd pay it back over time from project revenues. She's also willing to connect you with the small business administration programs that can help with expansion planning. Daniel studied the renderings, his mind racing through calculations. The scope of work was massive, would require at least 3 employees, maybe 4, would need a space twice the size of his current workshop, would mean transforming reed fabrication from a small operation into an actual company, would mean risk, growth, change, all the things he'd carefully avoided for 8 years in favor of stability. Why? He asked. Why would Elena do this? Jennifer's expression softened. Because she believes in supporting people who supported her, because she respects your work and thinks you deserve opportunities you haven't had access to, and because, though she'd never say this directly, I think she wants to maintain some connection to the person who saw her as more than just a CEO. The honesty in those words landed hard. Daniel set down the renderings and walked to his workshop window, looking out at the street. If I say yes to this, it changes everything. My whole business model, my schedule, my ability to be present for my daughter. I built this operation specifically to fit around single parenthood. Expansion means losing that flexibility. It also means security, Jennifer said gently. Enough revenue to hire help when you need it. Enough stability that missing one contract doesn't threaten your ability to pay rent. Ms. Harrington isn't trying to change your priorities. She's trying to give you resources to maintain them while doing work you're clearly capable of. Daniel thought about Sophie, about the conversation they'd had last week when she'd asked why they never traveled, why they didn't have a bigger apartment, why some things were always too expensive. He'd explained about building a business, about being careful with money, about how Daddy's work was important but growing slowly. She'd nodded with that understanding that killed him, his 8-year-old daughter accepting limitations she shouldn't have to think about. This opportunity could change that, could mean real financial security instead of the constant tightrope walk of single parenthood and small business ownership. Could mean Sophie got to be a kid who didn't worry about money, who could ask for things without seeing her father calculate costs. But it also meant accepting help from Elena, meant admitting that maybe their lives weren't as completely separate as he'd told himself. Meant acknowledging the connection that had formed between them during those strange, intense weeks. I need to think about this, Daniel said finally. Of course, take whatever time you need. Jennifer pulled out another card. This has my direct line. When you're ready to discuss, call me and we'll set up a meeting. No pressure, no timeline. Ms. Harrington wants you to make the right choice for you and your daughter. After Jennifer left, Daniel stood in his workshop surrounded by tools and metal and the life he'd carefully constructed. The safe life, the controlled life, the life where he knew exactly what each day would bring and could plan accordingly. But safety had its own costs. He thought about the rendering of those buildings, the scope of work that would challenge him, push him, force him to grow beyond the boundaries he'd set for himself. Thought about hiring people, training them, building something larger than one man in a workshop. Thought about Sophie getting older, developing dreams that required resources he didn't currently have. College, travel, opportunities he wanted to give her but couldn't quite reach from where he stood now. That evening, after dinner and homework and bath time, Daniel sat on Sophie's bed for their nightly reading ritual. But instead of opening the book, he said, "Can I ask you a question, sweetheart?" Sophie looked up from arranging her stuffed animals. "Okay. If Daddy's work changed, if I had to work different hours sometimes, or if we had to move the workshop to a bigger place, would that bother you?" Sophie considered this with the seriousness she brought to important questions. "Would you still pick me up from school?" "Most days, yes, but some days I might need Mrs. Rodriguez or another parent to help." "Would we still have Pizza Fridays?" "Absolutely. Pizza Fridays are sacred." Sophie smiled at the word sacred, which she'd learned last month and loved using. "Then it would be okay, as long as you're still my daddy and we still do our important stuff together." "Always," Daniel promised. "Even if work changes, that never changes." Sophie nodded, satisfied, and handed him the book. "Can we read 3 chapters tonight? It's getting really exciting." They read 3 chapters, and Daniel tucked her in with the usual routine. Mr. Bear in the crook of her arm, nightlight on, door open exactly 6 inches. Then he went to his kitchen and pulled out Jennifer Park's business card. He didn't call, not yet, but he kept the card on his counter where he could see it, a reminder that opportunities sometimes came from unexpected places, that growth meant risk but also possibility, that the safe choice wasn't always the right choice. 2 weeks later, Daniel finally called. Jennifer answered on the second ring, sounding pleased but not surprised. "Mr. Reed, I was hoping to hear from you." "I'm interested," Daniel said, "but I need to meet with Elena directly. If we're going to do this, I need to make sure we're clear on expectations, on boundaries, on what this partnership actually means." "I'll arrange it. Would you prefer to meet at her office or somewhere more neutral?" Daniel thought about walking back into Harrington Industries, into that world of glass and power and corporate politics. Neutral. Somewhere we can talk honestly without the weight of her position hanging over everything. How about coffee? There's a place near Millennium Park. Quiet? Good for conversation. Would Saturday morning work? I know you have your daughter, so Sophie has a play date Saturday morning, 9 to 11. I could do 10 o'clock. Perfect. I'll send you the address and let Ms. Harrington know. Saturday morning, Daniel dropped Sophie at Emma's house for a play date that involved something called Mermaid Spa Day, which seemed to require an alarming amount of glitter. Emma's mother assured him she'd survived 3 of these events already and had strategies for glitter removal. Daniel fled gratefully, promising to return at 11. The coffee shop Jennifer had chosen was tucked between buildings, the kind of place locals knew but tourists missed. Daniel arrived 10 minutes early and ordered black coffee, then claimed a table in the back corner where they'd have privacy. Elena walked in at exactly 10 o'clock. Daniel's first thought was that she looked different, more relaxed than he'd ever seen her. She wore jeans and a simple sweater instead of corporate armor, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked younger, more human. She spotted him and smiled, and Daniel felt something in his chest shift. 3 months apart hadn't erased the recognition he'd felt the first time they'd really talked, the sense that here was someone who understood what it meant to fight for what mattered. "Daniel," she sat across from him, ordering tea from the server who appeared immediately. "Thank you for agreeing to meet. I wasn't sure you would." "I almost didn't," he admitted. "Took me 2 weeks to make the call." "Jennifer said you wanted to discuss boundaries, expectations." Elena wrapped her hands around her teacup like she was drawing warmth from it. "I appreciate that. I should have set clearer boundaries from the start. That's what got us into trouble before." "What got us into trouble was desperation and poor planning," Daniel said, both of which made sense at the time. "But if we're going to work together going forward, we need to be honest about what this is." "Which is?" Daniel chose his words carefully. "A business partnership. You have projects that need custom metalwork. I have skills and a willingness to expand my operation to handle larger contracts. That's the foundation. Everything else? The history, the dinner, the board meeting, that's context but not currency. I won't use what happened as leverage, and you can't use it as obligation." Elena nodded slowly. "Agreed. Clean professional relationship with clear contracts and expectations." With one additional boundary, Daniel continued. My daughter comes first, always. If a project deadline conflicts with her school play, or her doctor's appointment, or just her needing her dad, the project waits. That's non-negotiable. I wouldn't expect anything else. Elena met his eyes. Daniel, I'm not offering you these contracts because I feel guilty or because I owe you. I'm offering them because your work is exceptional and because I trust you to deliver quality while maintaining your values. Those are rare qualities in this industry. And it has nothing to do with what happened between us? It has everything to do with what happened between us, Elena corrected, but not in the way you're thinking. What happened showed me your character, how you handle pressure, how you make decisions when the stakes are high, how you protect what matters. Those are exactly the qualities I want in a long-term partner. She paused. But if this makes you uncomfortable, if working with me feels too complicated, I'll understand. No hard feelings. Daniel studied her face, looking for manipulation or hidden agendas, but he only saw honesty and something that looked like hope. Tell me about the projects, the real scope, the real timeline, what you actually need. Elena pulled out her tablet and walked him through the developments. 3 buildings over 5 years. The first breaking ground in 6 months, which meant Daniel would need to be operational at a larger scale within 4 months. The metalwork requirements were extensive. Structural elements, decorative railings, custom fixtures, artistic installations for common areas. Quality was paramount. Cost was important but secondary to durability and design. You'd be the primary metalwork contractor for all 3 projects, Elena explained, with the option to bid on future developments if these go well. We're not locking you into exclusivity. You could still take other clients, other projects. But this would be your anchor work, your foundation revenue. Daniel did quick mental math. Even conservative estimates put the total contract value at over $2 million across 5 years. More money than Reed Fabrication had grossed in its entire existence. More opportunity than he'd ever imagined having access to. It was terrifying. It was also exactly what he dreamed about when he'd first opened the shop, doing meaningful work at significant scale, building things that would last, leaving a mark on the city's landscape. I'd need to hire people, Daniel said, thinking out loud. At least 3 skilled workers, maybe an apprentice. Would need a bigger space, better equipment, project management systems I don't currently have. The loan I'm offering would cover startup costs, equipment, facility rental for the first year, hiring expenses. You'd pay it back from project revenues at 3% interest, which is better than any commercial loan you'd qualify for. Elena pulled up spreadsheets showing projected cash flow, payment schedules, expansion timelines. I had my finance team run the numbers. It's aggressive growth, but it's sustainable if you're careful. And if something goes wrong, if I can't deliver, if the projects run over budget, if I hire the wrong people, then we work through it, Elena said simply. Daniel, I'm not expecting perfection. I'm expecting honest effort and clear communication. If problems arise, we solve them together. That's what partners do. The word partners hung between them, meaning more than just business and both of them knowing it. I need to talk to Sophie, Daniel said finally. This affects her life too. She's 8, but she's smart. She deserves to be part of the decision. Elena smiled. She's lucky to have you as her father. I'm lucky to have her as my daughter. Daniel closed the folder of project details. Give me a week. I need to really think through what expansion would mean, whether I can make it work while still being the parent she needs. Take whatever time you need. The offer stands regardless of timeline. They talked for another hour about details and logistics and the practicalities of growth, but they also talked about other things. Elena's efforts to repair her relationship with her father, which was progressing slowly but genuinely. Daniel's decision to finally let Sophie take swimming lessons, even though they were expensive, because her marine animal obsession deserved to be supported, the way both of them were learning to balance ambition with contentment, growth with gratitude. When they finally stood to leave, Elena held out her hand. Daniel shook it, feeling the formality and the warmth simultaneously. Whatever you decide, Elena said. Thank you for considering it. And Daniel, I'm glad we met. Even with all the chaos and complications, I'm glad our paths crossed. Me too, Daniel admitted, and meant it. That week, Daniel talked to Sophie about the possibility of change. Explained that Daddy might have the chance to do bigger, more important work, but it would mean some things would be different. She asked good questions. Would they have to move? Would she have to change schools? Would he still be able to come to her class presentations? And seemed satisfied with his answers. He also talked to Mrs. Rodriguez, who offered to increase her after-school help if needed. Talked to Marcus Chen, who knew other metal workers looking for work and could recommend skilled people. Talked to his bank about business loans and expansion planning, just to understand his options beyond Elena's offer. Everyone he consulted said the same thing. It was a phenomenal opportunity. The kind that could transform not just his business, but his entire future. The kind you'd be foolish to turn down. But Daniel had learned that good opportunities could also be dangerous. That growth meant vulnerability. That accepting help from Elena meant accepting a connection that went beyond simple business transactions. On Friday evening, exactly 1 week after the coffee meeting, Daniel made his decision. He called Elena's direct number, the one she'd given him for business discussions. She answered immediately. "Daniel? I'm in. Let's do this." The sound of her relief was audible. "Really? You're sure?" "I'm terrified, but yeah, I'm sure." Daniel smiled at his own courage. "Sophie and I talked about it. She's excited about Daddy building important buildings, and I'm excited about the challenge, about growing, about doing work that matters." "This is going to be amazing," Elena said, and he could hear the genuine joy in her voice. "I'll have Jennifer send over the contract details Monday. We can finalize everything within the month." "There's one more thing," Daniel said. "One more boundary we need to establish." "What's that?" "When this is all done, when the projects are complete and the partnership has run its course, we need to stay in each other's lives. Not as business associates or as people with complicated history. As friends." Daniel paused, making sure he meant what he was about to say. "Because I think we could be good friends, Elena. And I don't want to lose that possibility by keeping everything strictly professional." Elena was quiet for a long moment. "I'd like that. I'd like that very much." They talked for a few more minutes about next steps and timelines, but the important things had been said. When Daniel hung up, he felt lighter than he had in months, maybe years. Like he'd finally given himself permission to want more than just survival, to reach for growth, and opportunity, and connection. Sophie appeared in the kitchen doorway, clutching Mr. Bear. "Did you tell her yes?" "I did. We're going to do the big projects." "Good." Sophie nodded with satisfaction. "She seemed nice. When you talked about her before, you seemed happy." Daniel blinked, surprised by his daughter's perception. "I talked about her." "Sometimes. You got this look on your face, like when you finish a really hard project and it turns out perfect." Sophie climbed into his lap, even though she was getting too big for it. "I like when you're happy, Daddy." "I like when you're happy too, sweetheart. That's the whole point." The next 4 months were chaos. Daniel found a larger workshop space in a neighborhood where rent was affordable, but the building had good bones. Hired 3 workers, 2 experienced metal workers, and 1 recent trade school graduate with talent and hunger to learn. Bought equipment with the loan from Harrington Industries, feeling both terrified and exhilarated by the expansion. Sophie adjusted to the changes with the resilience of children. Mrs. Rodriguez picked her up from school 2 days a week now. On Fridays, she came to the new workshop and did homework in the office Daniel had set up, occasionally wandering out to watch the team work. His employees learned quickly that the boss's daughter was off limits for anything but respectful friendliness, and that criticizing her drawings would earn them Daniel's worst glare. Elena visited the workshop once during the expansion phase, officially to inspect progress, but really to see if Daniel was managing the transition successfully. She wore jeans and work boots this time, looking completely at ease surrounded by metal and machinery. "This is impressive," she said, watching Daniel's team fabricate test pieces for the first project. "You've built something real here." "We're getting there," Daniel said, still figuring out workflow and coordination. "But the team's good. They care about quality." Elena paused at Sophie's drawing taped to the wall, a new one showing buildings with elaborate metal decorations and a tiny figure labeled Daddy standing proudly beside them. "She's proud of you." "I hope so. I want her to see that taking risks can lead to good things, that growth is worth the fear." "Is it?" Elena asked, not challenging but genuinely curious. Worth the fear, I mean? Daniel looked around at the expanded workshop, at his team working together, at the promise of projects that would challenge and fulfill him. Ask me again in 6 months, but right now? Yeah, I think it is. The first project broke ground in late spring. Daniel's team delivered the initial structural components on schedule and under budget. The general contractor called to say it was some of the finest work he'd seen in 20 years. Daniel celebrated by taking Sophie to the aquarium she'd wanted to visit, where they spent 3 hours watching sea turtles, and she explained with scientific enthusiasm why Dr. Tusk, the stuffed narwhal, was anatomically accurate. Summer brought the second phase of installation, decorative railings and artistic elements that would define the building's character. Daniel worked alongside his team, teaching and learning and perfecting techniques. The work was hard and satisfying in equal measure. He came home exhausted most nights, but it was the good kind of tired, the kind that came from building something meaningful. In August, Harrington Industries held a press event to showcase their sustainable development initiative. Elena specifically requested Daniel's presence, not as a vendor, but as a featured partner. He almost said no, public events weren't his comfort zone, but Sophie overheard and insisted he go because, "The buildings are partly yours, Daddy. You should get to show people." So he went, wearing a suit that actually fit properly now, and stood with Elena as she explained the vision behind the projects to reporters and community members. When asked about the metalwork, Elena gestured to Daniel. "This is Daniel Reed, owner of Reed Fabrication and our primary metalwork partner. His craftsmanship and dedication to quality are integral to making these buildings not just functional, but beautiful." Daniel fielded questions about his process, his team, his philosophy on craftsmanship, spoke honestly about the challenges and rewards of expansion, and when one reporter asked how he'd gotten connected with Harrington Industries, he smiled and said simply, "Ms. Harrington believed in my work before I had the capacity to handle projects this size. She took a chance on me. I'm grateful for that opportunity." It was true, even if it wasn't the whole truth. The complexity beneath those words, the fake marriage, the board meeting, the threats and testimony and complicated emotions belonged to them privately. The public version was simpler, cleaner, and honest in the ways that mattered. After the event, Elena found him standing outside the building, looking up at the partially completed structure. "You did well in there. The reporters loved you." "I just told the truth," Daniel turned to her. "Thank you for including me, for making this feel like actual partnership instead of just contract work." "That's what it is, though. Actual partnership." Elena stood beside him, both of them studying the building. "Your work is going to be part of this city's landscape for decades. People will walk past these railings, touch them, use them, without knowing who made them, but they'll benefit from your craftsmanship anyway." "That's the best kind of legacy," Daniel said quietly. "The kind that serves people without needing recognition." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Elena said, "My father wants to meet with you." Daniel looked at her sharply. "Why?" "Because he's finally ready to admit he was wrong. About me, about the company, about the tactics he used." Elena's voice was careful. "He's been in therapy, working on understanding why he responded to losing control with destruction instead of acceptance. It's been hard for him, but he's trying. And he wants to apologize? He wants to try. I can't promise it'll be what you need to hear, but he wants the chance." Daniel considered this. Part of him wanted to refuse, to keep that door closed, to protect himself from Robert Harrington's complicated emotions. But he thought about what he'd told Sophie about growth being worth the fear, about taking risks on connection. "Okay," he said finally. "I'll meet with him, but on my terms, at my workshop during my work hours. And if it goes badly, he leaves and we don't try again." "Fair enough. I'll let him know." The meeting happened on a Tuesday afternoon. Robert arrived at the workshop looking older than Daniel remembered, but also somehow lighter, less burdened by the weight of control he'd been carrying. "Mr. Reed." Robert extended his hand and Daniel shook it. "Thank you for agreeing to this." They walked through the workshop, Robert examining the work in progress with clear appreciation. "This is exceptional craftsmanship. I can see why Elena chose to partner with you." "She chose to partner with me because I was willing to tell the truth when it mattered," Daniel said, even when that truth worked against her father. "Yes, about that." Robert stopped in front of a partially completed decorative panel, running his hand along the smooth metal. I owe you an apology. Several, actually. For threatening you. For investigating your life without permission. For attempting to use your daughter as leverage. For treating you as an obstacle instead of as a person. He turned to face Daniel directly. I was wrong. Completely, inexcusably wrong. And I'm sorry. The apology was more complete than Daniel had expected. More honest. Why now? Why apologize 6 months later? Because 6 months ago I wasn't ready to mean it. I was still angry, still convinced I'd been betrayed rather than outmaneuvered by my own tactics. Robert smiled slightly. Therapy has been illuminating. Apparently I have control issues. Daniel almost laughed. That's one way to put it. My daughter has forgiven me, or is working toward forgiveness. We have dinner once a month now. Talk about the business, about her life, about anything except our fight. Robert's expression grew serious. But I wanted to apologize to you separately. You got caught in the crossfire of a family conflict. That wasn't fair. No, it wasn't. Daniel crossed his arms. But I made the choice to stay in the fight, to testify, to protect Elena even when it would have been smarter to walk away. So I'm not entirely blameless. You protected my daughter when I was trying to destroy her, Robert said quietly. That's not blame. That's character. They talked for another 20 minutes. Robert asked about the projects, about Daniel's team, about his daughter, shared stories about building his own business, about the mistakes he'd made, about learning too late that control and love weren't the same thing. It wasn't friendship. Too much had happened for that. But it was something like mutual respect, recognition of shared humanity beneath the conflict. When Robert left, he shook Daniel's hand again. Take care of my daughter's projects, and thank you, Mr. Reed, for being the kind of man who stands up when it matters. Daniel watched him drive away, feeling another piece of the complicated past settle into something more manageable. Not forgiven, maybe, but understood, acknowledged, released. Fall arrived with cool air and changing leaves. The first building project reached completion, and Harrington Industries held a grand opening with community celebration. Daniel brought Sophie, who wore her favorite dress and her plastic ring from the arcade. She walked through the building with wide eyes, stopping at every railing and fixture her father's team had created. You made all of this? She asked, touching a decorative panel with careful reverence. My team and I made it together, Daniel corrected. But yeah, sweetheart, we built this. Sophie looked up at him with pride so pure it made his chest ache. I want to build things too when I grow up, important things that help people. You will, Daniel promised. Whatever you choose to build, you'll do it with integrity and care. I know you will. The celebration continued outside with food and music and community members exploring their new building. Daniel stood at the edges, watching his work exist in the world, watching people interact with metal he'd shaped with his own hands. It was exactly what he'd imagined when he'd first opened Reed Fabrication. Work that mattered, that served, that lasted. Elena found him as the sun was setting, painting the building's facade golden. You should be proud. I am, but not just of the building. Daniel gestured to where Sophie was playing with other kids, completely at ease. Of all of it, the business, the growth, the risks that paid off, the life we're building. We? Elena's smile was knowing. Sophie and me, mostly, but also you and me in a different way. This partnership has been good for both of us. Daniel paused, then took a risk of his own. I'm glad you walked into my workshop that night. Even with everything that happened, I'm glad. Even the chaos and the threats and the board meeting drama? Even that. Because it led here, to this. Daniel gestured at the building, at his daughter playing, at Elena standing beside him as the sun set. To a life that's bigger and scarier and more meaningful than what I had before. Elena was quiet for a moment, then she said, I have 2 more buildings to build, 5 more years of partnership ahead of us, if you're willing. But Daniel, I hope after that we keep finding reasons to stay in each other's lives. Because you're right. We make good friends. The best kind, Daniel agreed. The kind built on honesty and shared values and mutual respect. The kind that lasts. They stood together watching the celebration, 2 people who'd met in desperation and crisis and somehow found something more valuable than either had expected, a partnership built on trust, a friendship built on truth, and a future built on the understanding that sometimes the best things in life come from the risks you almost didn't take. Sophie ran over, grabbing Daniel's hand. "Daddy, can we come back tomorrow? I want to show Emma the building you made." "We can come back whenever you want," Daniel said, squeezing her hand. "This building isn't going anywhere. It's going to be here for a long, long time." Elena smiled at both of them. "That's the point. Building things that last." "Things that last," Daniel repeated, looking at his daughter, at his friend, at the building standing solid against the darkening sky. "Yeah, that's exactly the point." Months turned into years. The partnership continued, and the buildings rose one by one across Chicago's neighborhoods. Reed Fabrication grew from 3 employees to 8, from one project to multiple concurrent contracts, from a struggling shop to a respected name in custom metalwork. Daniel learned to delegate, to trust his team, to balance ambition with presence. Sophie grew into a thoughtful 10-year-old who still wanted to be a Marine veterinarian and who understood that her father's work mattered because it helped build communities. And through it all, Daniel and Elena maintained their friendship. Monthly coffee meetings, occasional dinners with Sophie included, honest conversations about business and life, and the ongoing work of building things worth protecting. Not romance, though the foundation was there if either of them ever chose to explore it. Just partnership and respect and the kind of connection that comes from seeing someone's true character in moments of crisis. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything neither of them had known they needed until they found it in the last place they'd expected. In a cold workshop, on a desperate night, when a single father and a CEO both took a chance on truth. The buildings stood. The friendship endured. The life they'd both built, separately and together, proved that sometimes the best stories don't follow the expected script. Sometimes they're messy and complicated and real. Sometimes they start with lies and end with truth. Sometimes they're not about finding perfect love, but about discovering perfect trust. And sometimes, Daniel thought as he stood in his expanded workshop years later, watching his team fabricate components for Elena's 6th project together, sometimes the greatest gift isn't the opportunity itself, but the courage to reach for it. The willingness to risk safety for growth, the faith that good people building good things together can create something lasting. For a single father who'd once thought his life was as big as it would ever get, and for a CEO who'd thought power meant standing alone, they'd both discovered something better, a partnership built on honesty, a friendship built on character, and a future built on the simple truth that the best things in life are worth fighting for, even when the fight looks nothing like you expected. Especially then,